We now have formal presentations from the public.
My name is Ryan Cumming, and I am an instructor at Loyola University Chicago and a member of Wayfarers Masonic Lodge number 1001 in Evanston. This is my brother Gary Langwell. He's a member of Evans Lodge number 524 in Evanston. As members of this community and members of Masonic Lodge, we are deeply committed to service and to being vital parts of a community where lots of great things are happening. We appreciate the invitation to be with you here this evening, and we are pleased to accept the invitation to support the Evanston School District Children's Program, and we thank you very much for the opportunity to be part of the wonderful things that are happening in this community and in this school district. So thank you very much. On behalf of do we have the check?
No, the checks were sent in.
The checks were sent in.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you very much.
Exactly. But thank you again for this opportunity to be with you and to be part of the work that you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you. That's very generous of you.
We'll look forward to next year with bigger and better.
Thank you.
Could I just make a comment to that? So I wanted to pay a special thank you. Last summer, when we became aware midsummer that the organization would typically provide school supplies for our neediest children, weren't able to do that, and we were trying. Various organizations stepped up in many large ways. I had reached out to the Masons because they had said to me previously, we would love to get involved and support the school district in Evanston, and so they came through with that, and it was 2 years ago that they made that comment to me when I was renting their space for a PTA event, and I knew it would be the beginning of a long relationship in Evanston. So thank you very much for this, and we hope to continue the relationship going forward.
Great. We're now on to public presentations. Jennifer Phillips.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Phillips. I live at 3651 Grove Street in Skokie, and I wanted to make a few comments and offer some questions about the math presentation that's going to happen tonight. It's a little strange because the presentation hasn't happened, but I'm going to make some comments and hopefully it'll be part of the discussion. But first I just wanted to say how exciting it is to be working with new district leadership who are so receptive to talking with parents about concerns and suggestions about math education. It's been a real breath of fresh air, and parents are really very happy about that, I think. And it's really evident how hard staff's been working since last summer. But given the accountability and achievement report data that shows downward trends for students at pretty much every level, it was troubling to me, at least, that the update memo didn't have specific and concrete benchmarks to measure progress towards student achievement in the year ahead. So I had a couple questions that I hope get covered in the board discussion or in Jess's presentation. The word differentiation didn't really appear in the memo. I'm guessing that the new MTSS may be the new differentiation. It'd be good to hear sort of what that transition is. The second point is if there are, if you think about 2 or 3 grade levels of student ability in every single Evanston classroom, it was surprising to me that there was no mention of personalized learning using technology in this memo, and I had a question about whether there will be any new instructional strategies using technology in math classrooms next year. My third question is about the algebra pilot. So there wasn't any mention in this update about the algebra pilot. I wanted to know what the status was and whether there'd be an update about the effectiveness over time. It's something that's come up over the last 2 years in the math update and wasn't included in this. The fourth point is on math acceleration, and it's a question given the new capacity that the district has in its data and research department, and that is, what longitudinal data does the district have for students who have been accelerated, and do they have that data going through high school? The fifth point is on the achievement gap, and just wanted to say it's fantastic to see a math fluency program being added to the district, and I'm hoping that really takes off. And there's, as I mentioned, a real critical need for personalized learning in this, and hoping that when you're thinking about the data on the achievement gap, that this is not a huge district. This isn't 300,000 students like CPS, and that I wanted to know if there was a plan for really zooming into what the needs were for some of the students who are behind in math. And thinking about asking questions about whether or not there are students who are African American, Hispanic, and or low income, and that are doing really, really well in this district, finding out what's working for them, what their teachers are doing, and figuring out ways to share that data district-wide. So I look forward to the presentation tonight, and thanks for the time.
Thanks, Jennifer. I'm sure these will come up during our discussion. We're now into board and district communications.
Thank you. I just want to make a quick comment about where we're at on the strategic plan, and I know we'll report about it later on. And really it's in the form of a thank you. We've received a tremendous amount of feedback, both during the town hall meetings, through the surveys, through individual emails on the draft of the strategic plan. We're working furiously to put all those data together and to actually respond in a way that's appropriate as we move forward. And as we also manage the plan itself and really looking at the plan as a 3-year plan over time, I want to be careful that we're not over-promising to do everything that we say we're going to do in year 1 or in the first 6 months. This is a longer journey that is a really important one. And we've gotten a lot of feedback in that way. Good on you is what we hear often, but take your time and do it right and do it well is what we've heard from many of our colleagues in the community. So my communication is just really in the form of a thank you for all who have been involved in the process. It's not over. We're still working on it. We will bring forward the draft to the board in early March, and that will have some adaptations based on the feedback that we've received.
Great. And now we have a report on the new website. Is that? Oh, okay. Just the website is live, and it looks fantastic. And then we have 2 park information sessions. Saturday, February 21st, 9:30 to 11, right here in JEH, and then Tuesdays, February 24th, from 7 to 8:30 at King Arts.
Tracy,
Yes.
these are 2 park information?
Yes, park, as in the exam.
Pardon me? The exam.
Oh,
the exam.
Yeah.
Park with the C, yeah, with the K.
Yeah, the C.
Okay.
No, that's confusing, actually.
It was confusing.
Thank you for that
But that's actually
clarification.
good, they're doing park
So-
C information sensitive stuff, but
It's about the new assessment part of testing, as opposed to the school. Any board communications? Nope. Okay, then we're on to our action items. First, Candace?
Yes. I move that the Board of Education accept the recommendations outlined in the attached group motion and approve the personnel appointments, leaves, retirements, and separations, January 2015 Board of Education meeting minutes, December 2014 Finance Committee meeting minutes, destruction of closed session audio recordings from January 2013, December 2014 list of bills, school treasury reports, and budget amendments, and the gift acceptances for District 65 and Dr. Bessie Rhodes School of Global Studies.
Second,
Second.
roll call, please.
Mr. Rickens?
Yes.
Ms. Garrison?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Ms. Chow?
Yes.
Ms. Carter?
Yes.
Ms. Bailey?
Yes.
And Ms. Butler?
Yes, the motion passes 7-0. Now the approval of the contract extension of landscaping bid. Suni?
I move that the Board of Education approve the 2-year contract extension, fiscal year 15-16 and fiscal year 16-17 with KGI Landscaping.
I'll second.
Great. Roll call, please.
Mr. Rickens?
Yes.
Ms. Garrison?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Ms. Chow?
Yes.
Ms. Carter?
Yes.
Ms. Bailey?
Yes.
Ms. Butler?
Yes, motion passes 7-0. Our first discussion item will be the financial presentation, and Kathy?
Yes, financial projections for fiscal years 16 through 20 were discussed at the at the board finance meeting on February 9th. They were discussed in detail. Tonight we have just a short presentation that I would like to show to the public and to the board. And I would like to open with some important highlights. District 65 has been managing its resources quite well, and it's evident in balanced budgets, clean audits, stable enrollment and staffing, and continuous projects to our buildings and improvements to technology. This slide illustrates operating funds budget for revenues for the current year, fiscal year 15. And you can see from this slide that the lion's share of our revenues comes from property taxes from local funds, 77%, which are under tax caps. And what it means basically that they can increase the growth in property taxes can be 5% or CPI, whichever is less. And with the CPI for 2014 being only 0.8, that growth will be very slim. 10% comes from the state, and approximately 6% comes from the federal government. This slide illustrates CPI, and the dark bars on the left are actual CPI. Lighter blue shade is on the right are projected. And you can see that the actual CPI has been very volatile and has been decreasing, with the last CPI for 2014 being only 0.8%. Going forward, the district is using 2%. The 10-year average has been 2.1. So we are, even though it looks like it's high, but we are actually being conservative. And even if you average out the last 6 CPIs, it's 1.9%. Next slide illustrates new property, which is not subject to tax caps. We have changed our projections, assumptions for our projections last year, down from 12.5 million value of the new property to 7.5. Years 2014, 16, and 18 are a little bit higher because they include TIFs expiring. We have TIF expiring in 2014, Southwest TIF, Howard Hartree in 2016, and Washington National in 2018. And Washington National is the largest. It's valued at $50 million currently, and it will be expiring in levy year 2018. This slide illustrates district's expenditures by object in our operating budget, approximately $1.6 million. And you can see clearly from this pie chart that 82% of our expenditures are personnel expenditures, salaries and benefits. Only 18% are non-personnel expenditures. I just want to point out your attention to other objects. We get a lot of questions, what's included? It's special education, expenditures for special education tuition, and the cost of Park School. There are a lot of unknowns affecting the district's financial future, primarily state legislation. We know that something's going to happen affecting pension cost shift. There are a lot of uncertainty related to general state aid, Senate Bill 1, which is basically repackaged Senate Bill 16. And even though the new bill gives a little bit more weight to special education and low-income children, District 65 will still lose the revenue if it is passed. There are a lot of uncertainties with federal revenues, especially with early Head Start program, and we at this point we don't know the impact of this proposed changes, and of course increased enrollment affecting class space and staffing. This graph illustrates the current budget and projected revenues and expenditures. Expenditures being red bar and revenues being blue. And you can see clearly, especially in fiscal year 2016-17, that the district's expenditures will be exceeding revenues. And again, this is the first year with this low CPI of 0.8, and we know that our expenditures, especially benefits and salaries, are much higher than 0.8%. This slide, even though it's hard to read, these are our actual projections by revenue category and an expenditure category. And next year, fiscal year 16, when we presented those projections in September, was still a positive number. Right now, unfortunately, with GSA decreasing due to improved low-income figures and additional expenditures for salaries is in the red. Fiscal year 17 being affected by this low CPI is looking much worse. Previously, it was around 4 million. Now it's 5.8 and growing because these the revenues and expenditures assumptions are cumulative, so it carries to the future years. I want to point your attention to fiscal year 20 to revenue to line number 1, and you can see a large increase in property taxes. That's due to this large TIF that's going to be expiring, bringing additional local revenues. And this is the final slide. Is the financial profile, and it's actually looking a little bit better than what we presented last year when we were basically projecting staying in early warning. Currently, because of our slightly increasing fund balance and projected surpluses, at least for last year, and I'm referring to yellow bars for 2014 and 15, we did receive a financial review instead of the warning, and we are projected to stay in the category for 1 more year. Are there any questions?
I do. It's okay. I'm sorry, I missed the meeting, so some of this is just some questions about probably will be coming up. One thing I just want to understand is 2019, 2020, when that TIF money comes in?
Yes.
And just because I think this deficit is so red, that I just want to understand that when the TIF money comes in, how much of that is an estimate of what's going to come to that top line?
Are you talking about the large TIF that we're seeing in 1920?
Yeah.
Okay, so that is the Washington National TIF, and that is estimated to bring almost 1.7 million in just with the levy alone. So what you see in 1920 is kind of like a double effect. We get that full increase in the fall of 2019, then we get 55% more of that increase in the spring. And that is why the tax revenue number jumps so significantly in 1920. It will not continue to jump at those rates unless we saw extremely high CPI factors. It'll level off at the CPI increase. So it's because you get the increase of a TIF 1.5 times in the first year it joins the tax rolls. And that's why the deficit for 1920 is slightly less than what is projected for 18-19, and it's due to that large increase in property taxes.
Okay, yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. The only thing I was trying to get at and understanding it, how right are you on the estimate? I mean, you know how much is coming in. Is it likely to be plus or is it?
Well, as we've seen property values fluctuating in the last, probably 5 levy years at least, these are based on updated estimates from the city of Evanston. They have tweaked these numbers from time to time. Like any other property, it will fluctuate with property values. So this is the latest estimates that we got from the city of Evanston.
Because still, I was thinking because it's you've had that boost, but we're still showing a $7 million
Correct.
deficit. So if we were off at all on the revenue line, and of course the CPI.
And the CPI is estimated.
Right. The
yes.
we got an estimated CPI in these numbers as well.
Richard, the only thing I noted on this is, and I wasn't here, is that I'm not going to say almost $500,000. I'll say 400,000, round down, $400,000 deficit, which actually is a lot. It's a big. I mean, when it's just in front of us, right? And I'm just wondering, in finance, are we going to be talking about this at each of the meetings? How is the process that we're going to be discussing the deficit next year and the year after?
I'm not sure that we've determined if we're going to talk about it at every meeting, but I think that probably makes sense. I know one thing we've talked with the administration about is just really looking very closely at some of the near-term expenses so that we can write that particular line item for next year. I know we have at least typically it's been, May and June where we've talked about the budget. It would make sense that we would talk about it in March and April as well, but we hadn't specifically slated that yet.
And I've started an internal process with the senior team to look at the budgets and to go as deep as we can go in terms of understanding where we're at and where we need to go. I mean, the story here is one that goes beyond next year. So let's assume that we can find the resources that would cover the $400,000. That pops up over the next 5 years as a structural deficit that we have to pay attention to. And so that as we think about this budget year, we have to think about the out years and think about where we can reduce costs so that those numbers in red over the next 5 years actually go down or get out of the red color.
Yeah, and I guess that might, the 400,000, I'm sure you'll be able to, well, I should say insurance, it still is, it's a fair amount. But I guess then the plan for that, it's not 2 years away, it's a year from now we'll be talking about, that's a big number. So I just think in finance we should be talking about that $5.8 million this year because it's going to impact plans for next year.
And I also want to point out that the cost shift, starting with next year at 0.5% is built in to the projection. So if there is no legislation and it's about 400,000 that first year, that's going to be removed from the budget.
And then that would help next year unless you just put it off.
But the numbers in red over the 5-year period really is a call to us to say that we've got to make some changes. And we'll be focused on that and proposing that to you and to the public and engage in the process. But we know that we've got to change some things.
And I think, Katie, there was a recognition a couple of years ago that it was going to be hard to trim around the edges to deal with some of these deficits that we saw farther out. And I think it's just getting closer.
Yeah, it's kind of looming in a way that
right.
2 or 3 years isn't. And I think you're right. I don't, there's trimming at 5.8, you're changing about making programmatic changes would greatly impact this district.
And I believe Governor will be proposing his budget this week. I think so. We should have more information and see what EASB is proposing, what he's proposing, and then build a budget around this new information. Included in our budget.
Any other questions? Thank you, Kathy.
You're welcome.
See this again soon. Now we're on to the literacy update. John, you want to introduce it?
Great, thank you. I'll introduce both my colleagues, Dimitra Disator, our literacy coordinator for the district, and Jess Reyes, our STEM coordinator and director for the district. Both of them are bringing before the board tonight an update on projects that are underway, as well as some initial plans for the work next year. The presentations tonight are shared in the important context of the Achievement and Accountability Report, which we reviewed recently, that showed sobering results of our work over the past 4 years and the need to continue to evaluate the work that we are doing across our curriculum and curricular areas in our instruction in every classroom, and also the draft strategic plan and the strategic planning process, which will, of course, direct our efforts over the next 3 years, and will certainly impact the plans that we have in literacy and math, as well as social studies and science, and all of our curricular areas over that period of time. So I want to thank Dimitra and Jess for their comprehensive preparation to share with you this evening. Look forward to your questions afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Good evening. Thank you, everybody, for this opportunity to share where we're at right now. Hopefully everyone can hear me. I hope tonight in the next few minutes I can efficiently and thoroughly update you on what's been happening. Much of what I'm going to talk about is in the memo, but I wanted to just highlight a few important aspects of what's happening in literacy. So the first part of my presentation is going to be on some high-level updates in reading and writing, K-8. And then the second part of the presentation will dig a little deeper into where we are in terms of grammar instruction. So, as you know, much of what we're drawing on in terms of our data and the conclusions that we're drawing come from these assessments. The Illinois Snapshot of Early Literacy is what we use for our kindergarten through second grade students, and it assesses foundational skills. Our developmental reading assessment is another assessment used by our K-3 teachers. All students are assessed, and it addresses where students are in terms of their ability to read grade level text. And then, of course, MAP and ISAT, which I know we are all familiar with, beginning at third grade on up, and they're kind of our high stakes where students are as a district data. So based on these pieces, based on this data, what I looked at is I was able to determine some areas of need in our literacy programming. And of course, as Mr. Price mentioned, the strategic plan is also informing this conversation as well, and it's kind of helping to redirect our efforts. And so one of the areas that we're all talking about is what's happening with our earliest readers. And so starting even at our pre-K level, we are looking at what the programming currently looks like. I'm working with Lauren Letau, and we are talking to teachers, doing classroom observations in the pre-K program. We're working on looking at the PALS data, which is an early assessment, early literacy assessment. And based on what we find, we're going to be making recommendations for curricular areas of need and where the programming should go next. Another area of need is to create a framework for literacy instruction at the K-2 grades for our early, emergent, and transitional readers. This is probably our most critical band of readers. And if we can really address what's happening with those guys and get the foundation solid, the trajectory for those students up through third grade and on up is going to be that much more successful. And so those bulleted points there speak to the things that we're going to be evaluating over the course of this year and then making some recommendations. Another area of need in literacy is really looking at what our grammar and mechanics instruction currently looks like. And I think the next step for us is to look at how we evaluate this and just kind of shoring up how we measure how well students own these strategies and these skills from one grade to the next. And I'll talk more about that in a few more slides. Okay, did I skip one? Oh, of course, disciplinary literacy is another area of need. Certainly it's in our strategic plan, and certainly it's our part of our joint literacy goal. And the nice thing about the disciplinary literacy is it puts all of the curricular departments together and thinking about what that vision is for literate students in our community. And in District 65, we have the task of setting the progression, setting the foundation all the way, and preparing students for becoming disciplinary literate as they enter late middle school and into high school. So whereas the high school just can more focus at the top of the pyramid, I don't know if you recall, there's kind of a pyramid sort of shape that disciplinary literacy is built on. The elementary district has to set the foundation, talk about, kind of help students understand what it means to read in different disciplines and what fiction looks like versus nonfiction, et cetera, and then prepare them for becoming more specialized readers and thinkers in a given content area. And then, of course, arching over all of what I just mentioned is vocabulary development. And I think we are going to really be looking at what vocabulary instruction looks like, what are some of the concerns that we have around students' vocabulary needs, their abilities. And I've been reading a lot of research about this, and what we're finding is that our students who we would consider our most at-risk populations, one of the barriers is that they don't have as much vocabulary in their schema. And so what happens is they don't have necessarily as much of a foundation for knowledge on which they can build. And what happens is over time, the students that are more adept and stronger with vocabulary, their abilities grow exponentially. And students that have limited vocabulary, they grow, but they don't grow at that rate that their peers do. And so I think we need to revisit what vocabulary instruction looks like, and certainly starting at our youngest, capturing in our pre-K program and certainly in our K-2 program. So I think we really need to look a little bit deeper into what that looks like. And obviously it's connected to disciplinary literacy too. It's a natural connection across all the areas. So now that's kind of where we are headed. I want to just kind of capture what has been happening, and I'm just going to go back 1 year. We've been doing a lot of work over the past few years, but I'm just going to kind of capture what's been happening over the last year. And currently we are implementing a new reading workshop curriculum in 5th grade. And one of the reasons for this shift was because the transition from 5th to 6th grade was, for those students, was not what we needed more support for those guys. And so we needed to ramp up what was happening in 5th grade. And so what we did is we looked at our writing workshop units of study, and we created units of study in reading that mirror those writing workshop units of study. And what has been, and it's based on the notion that reading and writing happen in tandem. And so what you do in one helps you produce in the other. And so that's the way that this curriculum was aligned. And like I said, it sets students up for the behaviors and the habits of mind that they need to enter 6th grade successfully. This year we're also working on a very small pilot for the 4th grade teachers. We have a handful of teachers that are working with a coach to see what the implementation would look like of this curriculum would look like at 4th grade. And based on resource allocation and the results of this will determine to what extent we can support, what level we can support moving forward with the curriculum in 4th grade for next year. And then finally, in reading, we have a Making Meaning pilot for K-3, and it's actually a pretty exciting opportunity for our teachers. We have about 60 teachers across the district that are they're working with Carrie Bartholomew from Developmental Studies Center. She is a District 65 parent as well. And they have been working with her to implement this Making Meaning. And it's a it's a read aloud reading comprehension program. And it teaches reading strategies and critical thinking, and layered in with that are social emotional behaviors, how to have academic discourse with one another, and how to respectfully disagree, how to have conversations with one another that are not parallel, that add on and build on each other's the story or whatever they're talking about. So the teachers have really been thrilled about what's happening with this, with their work around this so far this year. So those are some of the current reading programs that we're working on. In terms of writing, last spring we implemented a K-8 writing portfolio where we had done some major revamping of our writing curriculum over the past few years, and we were really focused on getting it up and running and getting the teachers and the students acclimated to the shifts in the instruction. And one of the last things to kind of come around now is the writing portfolio. Different schools have been doing collecting portfolios in a variety of ways over the years, but we decided we really needed to streamline and have a much more thoughtful way to have students collect their work and have it, make sure that it's valued by the students and the teachers. And so what we've done is we've designated certain pieces of writing that go into the portfolio. Students reflect on it. They reflect on their writing, and then that writing is passed forward the next year. And as each unit of study is begun, teachers and students pull out that previous set of writing, and they look at the goals that were set last year. They talk about what are the habits or the features that go into that type of writing, and then they use that as a launch. So it's the notion is that over time, we won't be starting anew, that we're really, it'll be in the student spaces that you're building from one year to the next on what they had done the previous year. So that's happening K-8. Last year, we really started in earnest revisiting what grammar looks like in the middle school, grammar instruction, and so we had some PD around it last year and looked at close reading around grammar. Again, to kind of mirror that what happens in reading impacts your writing and vice versa. And so last year we had created some teacher checklists that identified what students should be able to know and do at each grade level. And again, in a few more slides, I'll get in more detail to how that's evolved since last year. So also coming into this year, again, our middle school teachers are really working at developing more explicit grammar assignments that explicitly, our instruction is explicit every day, but then what do the assignments look like and how do we know that students are really owning and mastering those grammatical skills? So they've been really working hard this year to think about what are authentic ways that students can show that they're taking on the writing, the grammar, but also in a meaningful way for them. And so now we're going to kind of shift into, we're going to spend a little bit more time going into a deeper focus on grammar and mechanics. And I was thinking these are probably the 3 takeaways for grammar that I'd like for folks to hold on to, that our grammar and mechanics skills are aligned across the grades. Grammar is explicitly taught, and the application of skills in student writing is the focus. So it's taught in an explicit way, and then it's applied. And then we're currently, like I said earlier, we're currently developing ways to more formally evaluate what that, how we can really measure if kids are learning it. This, I know you can't see this. This is more for a visual to show you that this is taken right from the Common Core, and our grammar and mechanics skills are taken right from this. And I wanted to show you, though, across the top on the right side are the grade levels, starting with 3rd grade on up. And what you see is the strategies, or the skills, excuse me, overlap from one grade to the next. So as students write in increasingly complex ways, and they have more complex ideas to grapple with, teachers have to continue to revisit these skills. And so even where some of the red boxes kind of it looks like they've ended, what's happening is they've merged into more sophisticated skills down the road. So it really does show that, you can, to a certain extent, you can master and know, but you really have to revisit this stuff over and over again as students become more sophisticated writers. This, again, I know you can't really see it, but it really is just highlight some of the resources that we have in the district for teachers. These are resources for planning grammar instruction. I have a sample of a 3rd grade pacing calendar, and on the left side are the units of study throughout the year, or actually through April, that one shows. And then on the very right side are all the grammar skills that need to be taught that are matched with each unit throughout the course of the year. And within the writing binders, there are specific and explicit lessons that match, that address those skills. And then on the right side is the 6th through 8th grade list of expectations for 6, 7, and 8. And again, that's the teacher form that we started with a few years ago. And again, in a few more slides, I'll show you how it's evolved since then. But again, those highlight exactly, they're taken right from the Common Core, and they highlight what students should know and do at each grade level. So the next few slides, or just about 3 slides, show you just some samples of what's happening in classrooms, what you might walk in and see in a classroom. So this is in a 2nd grade classroom. Again, explicit teaching of what to do with spelling, proper nouns, complete sentences, those sorts of things. And then this is an example of a student applying what's been taught. And in this particular unit, the student, or this particular piece, the student is writing a book review, and they had been looking at adjectives and adverbs. And so the students had to go back in and revise for putting in richer adjectives and adverbs. So that's what that reflects. 7th grade classrooms, you might see these sorts of displays are anchor charts around the room. These are examples of compound and complex sentence instruction, and students are playing around with and applying what they've learned. So that's one way. Another way that students are being assessed is, and this is again just for a visual, again, students are looking at compound and complex sentences, and there's like a day 1, day 3, and day 5. So over the course of 5 days, every day the students were doing these quick sorts of exit slips that asked them to apply, to either explain what compound, I can't see that one. I think it's like what compound sentences are. They were asked to find them in their reading, and then they were asked to find them in their writing, and then by the end of the week they had to write a paragraph that demonstrated how they were using compound sentences, and they had to label them. So these are some of the things that are happening in the classrooms, and they, like I said, the teachers are continuing to work toward more concrete ways to measure this sort of thing. And then finally, again, what are teachers and students doing to inform their needs? And so on the left side, you have an example of, remember earlier I showed you the checklist of what teachers would expect kids to do at 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. Oops. And that's my dog. That's not a good thing. Okay. So what we did is we took the department chairs, we worked together from each building, and we came up with checklists that students use. And so this is an example, partial example of a 6th grade one, and it's all the skills that a 6th grader should be able to demonstrate they know by the end of the year. And so they do a little self-assessment on the left side, and then they go into their writing and look for examples to what extent they can find this in their writing. And then this document is used in conjunction with the conferring process. So when students and teachers are meeting, they're using this document as well to set goals around grammar. And then on the right side is just a list of commonly used and confused words. And so there's a list there, and then teachers and students add on their own. There's space for more. And students kind of rate themselves, and then they're held accountable for those over the course of the year. So that is the presentation. I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you.
As needed.
Gather around. So as the light comes on, questions? Anyone? Suni?
Yeah, I have a question.
Sure.
There, obviously, as you mentioned before, there's a lot of focus on pre-K
Mhm.
and what's going on there. And you also noted that vocabulary is where there's a big differential that we're seeing in
Mhm.
students' progress. But I think we probably also all read the research that vocabulary really starts in infancy in
Right.
that language development.
Right.
So I guess I'm wondering if you can speak at all too about how we're using with our joint literacy goal, with the Cradle to Career initiative, like how are we going to address even before pre-K, some of these interventions that we can do to get kids starting at a more even level when they come to us.
Right. Well, I think the vocabulary piece, like you said, it does start in the home, and I think what we'd like to do is start working more with the folks in those 0 to 3 agencies and seeing what we can do in terms of building relationships and helping them maybe get books in the home, talking with them about how to talk with parents and giving them some language support, what are ways that they can engage with families in the home. So I think that's where we're trying to get to, is I think the best thing is to reach out to those agencies that are in that 0 to 3 community and helping them.
And specifically on Cradle to Career, where the group is right at the edge of diving into what we're calling solution design teams. And part of the solution design team that's been as the example all the way through my involvement, and then prior to that has a literacy component as one of the vital components to think about across the city. And so as we think about literacy, as Demetra presents, our colleagues at the Evanston Public Library, our colleagues in Parks and Rec, our colleagues in the social service agencies, our colleagues who work in the health field actually can be helping us as we help them on their range of activities. So it's teed up to be engaged upon, and we're just not there yet.
And then also just one other thing about pre-K review and the review of curricula, which I'm assuming that's talking about what's going on downstairs here, but to what extent do we work with other preschool providers throughout the community? Do we have any sort of formal way of getting like recommended curricula out, or what we're expecting, for kindergarten? I know we do general like kindergarten readiness.
Right. I mean, like, what are the benchmarks?
Yeah, what are the benchmarks, and to what extent do we share the information, the assessments that we use, and things like that with other preschool providers in the area?
Well, to be honest, I don't know.
I don't think we have
I don't think
we have a formalized program at this point or initiative to do that.
So something we can.
But I'm aware of.
Because it just seems, obviously we have a limited capacity in this building of what we can do with pre-K, but we know from our enrollment, our opening schools report, kids are going to the preschool program, so having some sort of
I think
commonality there.
that would we would like to pursue that. I think that would be good. Mm-hmm.
It's actually something we had submitted that grant for our early childhood funding, and that's something that we discussed, that we could expand our work with the agencies that we'd be working with if that was to come through.
Joyce and I are also talking about, as we think about the strategic plan, how to pay attention to the broad range of needs that children have as they come to the district, and what data do we have, what information do we have, and so the data flow in will help us in making decisions as we move forward. But I think the nice encouragement is let's think about what the push out would be to some of our colleagues in the community.
Does anyone have any other questions on kindergarten readiness? Because I think that's an interesting topic. And I had one question before we move on. Could I ask you if you all, so you say 60% of the kids come in with letter identification, sounds. Have you ever tracked those 40% who don't come in with that readiness, how they tend to do? Is the correlation strong enough to say that those are the kids that we really are seeing the gap open up with?
To target. I think they're probably, I mean, to be honest, I haven't specifically dove in that deeply, but I think there probably is a correlation. So they, like I said, roughly they come in around 60% of our kids come in with a pretty solid foundation. By the end, we're, again, across K2, roughly in the 75 to 85% range, again, across a variety of snapshots in terms of mastery. So I think we need to look more in terms of, again, what are the specific, kind of flesh that layer out even more, and really, you're right, and see really where those students end up going and what their course of education is. So I think that would be an interesting, I haven't dug that deeply in, so.
I had a kind of a question to build on that, which was, so if we have 60%, what are we desiring? Because we know developmentally, not all kids, is it right for them potentially to come in with those, with those skills, and they will acquire them in the right time. So I don't know that 100% is the target, and I'm just wondering what is the target that you would like to see coming in? Is there a specific kind of benchmark number, or and then related to that, do we know anything about, do we have anything in terms of breaking that out by pre-K experience? Does it correlate with pre-K experience and subgroup? Kind of breaking that number down into, is it the same based on various subgroups that we've looked at before?
Well, I think a couple things. One, I think coming in, we get who we get with whatever preparation, but I think, as Ms. Cartha was saying, I think we can look at what else we can do to really dig in deeply and be more supportive of that 0 to 3. And then the next piece of it, though, is how do we support the kids then as they move forward? And I think the foundational skills are pretty much, they're what we call constrained. So you learn your letters, there's a number, there's a number of those, you learn your sounds. And so I think what we can do is really, like you were saying, I think break down exactly where the kids are that are struggling, and figure out what needs to be better, what sorts of programmatic supports those kids need. So.
And I would say just, kind of echoing what SUNY said, I think when we've talked from a joint literacy standpoint and you're already doing this evaluation, it would be great if there was a deliverable to the community. If these are our expectations for curricula that we are doing in our own doors, and what our expectations are from pre-K into kindergarten, why not set that as a potential standard across, within the community and with our partners? Not that they will necessarily, we can't oblige them to heed that as the standard, but at least it would be a common place for us all to begin, that this is what we're trying to drive towards as kindergarten readiness and the various facets of that.
Right.
If I could just add, I think we really want to be focused on where I think we want to focus is setting really clear benchmarks for end of second grade, for example. So regardless of where children come to us from or with the skills that they come to us with, we believe that all of our children can be ready by the end of second grade to enter third grade reading at grade level. So that's where I think our thinking around setting the benchmarks for our own performance and deliverables to the community would be understanding the developmental differences that children have. By the end of second grade, we should set really clear benchmarks for where our children are going to be.
Great. More questions?
I just think you're asking some really great questions in terms of, pre-K and such. And I know one of the things we've talked about on a variety of topics is what information the board might be looking for, generally speaking, in this type of presentation. And one thing that, as I show this, it's not limited just to this particular report, but it's really the evaluation. And there's a lot going on in here. And I think it's clear there's a lot of thought and effort that has occurred and is going to continue to occur to move all these initiatives forward. What I personally want to understand is what's the impact? And I think it would be helpful for us to know in advance that you're talking about some benchmarks, right? For each of these initiatives, how are we going to measure if they've had the desired impact? Because I don't really have any understanding when we come back in a year how we'll measure. I mean, is it simply looking at a test score, or, I'm sure for the K2 stuff, we want to have some early indicators there, right? Are they on track and such? And so I would ask, that's sort of a more general ask, excuse me, around all of the topics. But specific to this, it'd be really helpful as a follow-up, just as an FYI, to understand how you would expect to evaluate all of the things that you've got going on. I am curious to what extent District 202 was involved in some of these areas. When I think about like the framework for literacy instruction and how that, if we think about a K-12 continuum, what was their level of involvement, if any, in the process?
Actually, there hasn't been. You know, we've been doing more of articulation at the middle school level, and so we've just relied on what we know is best practice for beginning developing readers. So, you know.
And I just, again, this is probably applicable across a whole bunch of areas, right? If we have the K-12 mindset and not just the K-8, how would that reshape what we're putting in place? And I think that's really important. And I don't know if seeking input on some of these things that are in motion might be useful, especially some of the areas that are middle school related, might be helpful or might have you tweak some of the things that you've already considered. I don't want to be, I want to balance this because I think there was, you know, there were two messages, right, in the memo. Essentially, there's a lot of effort. People are trying really hard. We have a lot of good things in place. And yet I think we all recognize that our achievement levels aren't where we want them to be. And in fact, that they're trending the opposite direction of where we want to be. And so I think it's important for people to be acknowledged for their effort. And yet I also want to make sure that we don't sort of bury what I feel some real urgency around, which is, you know, we've got to figure out, we have to change course pretty quickly on some things. And so while I appreciate the desire to acknowledge and that importance, I also just want to heighten, we've got some things to fix, and that's really why I'm focused on the evaluation too. We can't wait 2 or 3 years to see how some of these things are landing. We need to know sooner. So those are my comments.
If we're having more general questions, I thought we were just going from the pre-K. I do have more.
I'm sorry.
Beyond
I thought we had
pre-K.
moved off of pre-K. I'm sorry.
We're now open
To broader
yes,
questions.
to all
Okay.
questions.
Do you want to go first, Claudia?
Well, one of the things that occurred to me as I listened to what you were talking about was initiative fatigue. And I'm thinking about the middle schools in particular. And I couldn't help but notice about the same time we introduced the new writing curriculum, which was, you know, a lot more intense than we had had before. Was about the same time our reading scores started to take a nosedive, and we're going to add grammar, and we're going to add vocabulary. How do you see the teachers having time? And are we going to give up anything? Are we going to give up sustained silent reading? Are we going to give up conferencing with kids? I mean, there's just only so much time a teacher has.
Right.
And so, like, if you were to look forward, and I really appreciate the report, it's great, what would you think?
Right, and that's a good question. And I think it's funny, that's actually a great question to ask, because this is in middle school, this is our second year now where we've not had any changes, where we've just been able to stay the course and really dig in deep. And what I have noticed when I talk with the teachers, they're really in a good place because they're able to just really work on owning the curriculum and really digging into the standards and developing really good essential questions and being thoughtful about the text that they're selecting. So it's all coming together for them. And I think with the vocab piece, I don't see that as being, so let me back up a minute. So the grammar piece was like the next natural piece. I mean, because like you said, there's only so much you can do at one time. So we've spent a lot of time just really helping them be as supportive as we can to help them get this up and running. The grammar piece was the next piece. And that hasn't been too much from my conversations with teachers, I don't know that that's been too much like they were ready because that was the next natural segue. And so I think with the vocab, in literacy at least, in the language arts department, they're already addressing vocab, but I think, again, just bringing back some heightened awareness around what it really means to own words. How do you make sure that those kids are being held accountable for really ratcheting up their vocabulary in their writing? So I don't know that's just, in my opinion, more professional development. And I don't know that I necessarily see that as a truly new piece, because we already talk vocab, but I think it's just in earnest now, putting a little bit more of a spotlight on it. So I could be wrong, but like I said, in my conversations with teachers, I don't know that it'll be a huge, oh gosh, here we go again.
And then
piece.
just one follow-up to that. When I myself took the PART test as an experiment for 8th grade, and it was pretty intense.
It is.
I didn't do very well.
It is.
Because I tried to do it fast. And I found out you cannot do this fast.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering how we're going to encourage those habits of mind, of really close reading, digging into the text, slowing down, checking back, and all of that with the way we're teaching just plain old reading, like character setting, plot,
Right.
conflict, all of those things, because you need to know all that stuff to be successful on the part.
Right, exactly. So the close reading actually is happening, again, that's another strategy that's a means to the end around how do you determine how setting impacted a character? How do you determine how characters changed over time? So again, those are just through the lessons and the shared text and having students do literary analyses around that sort of work. It's actually getting them to dig into that already. I think honestly the challenge will be in a constrained amount of time, how will students navigate that on the test itself.
So when you say shared text, we have shared text, everybody's looking at the same thing.
Yep, absolutely. In every unit of study, there's either there's at least one class novel throughout the year in the grades, and then with every unit of study, there are short stories or there's an informational piece that really is pretty rigorous, because I think last year we kind of analyzed where the pieces of text are on the continuum, and so there is always what we call an anchor text or a mentor text that the kids come back to that anchors their learning, and that's where they go in and practice together close reading on some aspect of literature, informational reading, and then they go and apply that in their own reading. So that's kind of the balance. So that's how we've defined workshop. There's a little bit of controlled management and opportunities to explore and apply on your own. So.
Candace.
Thank you for the report, Demetra. It was a juxtaposition, I think, as you've heard, against the achievement report. I had a couple questions that aren't directly addressed in the report, but just looking for your thoughts and insights. So if we back away from, looking at a 4-year trajectory that, growth scores are down and some of the other concerns that we've talked about, what do you see as the factors at play? I mean, I know you talked about, concerns around vocabulary specifically, but, broad strokes, what changes, because we spoke of this and the need to look at this last time, but we don't have the knowledge that you do. So I'm curious as to things like anything from curricular changes to actually resources. So, what has been the change in resources to support literacy? Has there been any substantive change over the last 4 years? Curricular changes, we've had a number of them that Claudia pointed out and you spoke of. So do we believe now that those changes are consistent and pervasively now the new curriculum is being delivered that way? So just more of a, any kind of high level, broad strokes of thoughts you have, insights based on that data that would guide you to, here's where I believe the gaps are, and then relates back to the plan.
My thoughts specifically, 3rd grade on up, let me back up. I'm gonna start with kind of middle school. And like I said, I think the one thing that has happened is the teachers are now in a place where they can really focus on measuring the sorts of texts that are in kids' hands. I mean, that's become, we've really focused on independent reading as well over the past few years. So in addition to the mentor texts and the shared texts, the sorts of texts that kids are reading on their own, what we call managed choice. So, and I think through the independent reading piece and the managed choice piece, that, and the more that we learn about text complexity and what are the factors in complex text, I think teachers are becoming more savvy in helping students challenge themselves, and so I think teachers are being much more sensitive to and thoughtful about our kids ramping up the sorts of books that they're reading from one book to the next over the course of the year. So again, and I think to Mr. Rikis' point, we don't see the hard data that we want to see in the numbers, but I can say with complete confidence that the students are they're taking more risks, they're reading more, and so I think resources, we're actually in a pretty good place, especially at our middle school. The teachers work really closely with librarians. They're working hard to make sure that kids, like I said, are reading books that they're interested in and books that might be just a little bit out of reach for them, but because there's an interest, that also, that whole engagement piece really can propel kids forward. So I don't know if that's answering your question directly.
It sounds like what you're saying is that you believe if we stay the course, that we're going to reap the benefits, and we haven't yet. And I might totally be paraphrasing, but that's what I'm trying to understand. Versus we need to, make some pretty significant course corrections. So that's what I'm trying to understand.
Yeah, no, I would.
Is the path forward less change, but commit, we've got to fully commit to get to
the right changes and everything?
Or is it, we've got to commit here, and then there's this other area where we believe we do have pretty significant deficiencies that we need to address. Because in my mind, I'm just trying to get the lay of the land from that perspective.
Right. No, and I think, again, at middle school, and I think I do believe that we're on the right course. In my professional opinion, I think we've got what best practice says we need to have in place. And I think if we continue to support the teachers and really helping them dig in deep in terms of how they confer with kids and how they set goals with kids and how they push kids forward, I think those are the nuances that are going to make the difference. And I forgot what else I was going to say, but I think those are the sorts of things that are really going to, impact. And as I said earlier, we're really working on now what happens in those earlier grades so that things are growing exponentially for kids as they go up the grades, and there's not these kind of wonky gaps up the way. I will say too that what I have noticed, and I've spoken with a number of teachers about this, over the past few years, what they have said is that the writing has changed significantly. What they get from one year to the next has really shifted. And so I think that speaks to, again, the force and the support of the curriculum. So in the writing piece, I think there's pieces already there. Our rubrics are also for evaluating the writing, are pretty rich and pretty rigorous. And if you lined up, rubrics across the grades, you'd see that the expectations are really ramped up from one year to the next.
And has there been any change based on the workshop models, or again, over the 4 years, as we think about other key levers, it's just time, right? In distribution between time focus on reading versus writing that could affect, spending less time on the reading comprehension? Have there been any other major changes during this period around instructional time allocation?
Not yet, no.
Thank you.
So I think it's well put together, thank you. I actually like the back where you have the summary of the different programs based on the different grades. When I look at it, I see we're attempting to implement several different initiatives, 6 or 7 in 2015, 2016, and I guess my only question is that enough or is that too much? Is that really scalable? I mean, are you you and your team able to really implement those? Or is that, I was thinking of like the stoplight, the green, the yellow, the red. Do we need to maybe put that on each of these to say which ones we're really going ahead with and which ones we might need to slow down? And I know they're all important, but.
I know.
Any
They all
thoughts
seem
on that?
urgent and important. The disciplinary, in my opinion, when I look at this, the disciplinary literacy is kind of the overarching piece that connects all of these things together. So that's one way that I take this. Vocabulary development, again, I think is not going to be such a huge shift because it has been in the conversation. We can just kind of bring it back to the forefront. And again, I don't think it's just going to be the literacy department. It's going to be, everyone else gets a piece of that pie as well. And I think collectively we can all really make an impact and come at it from our respective disciplines. And then the primary piece, I mean, this as we're going through this, it does sound ambitious. I'm talking about this, wow. But the primary piece, because I'm confident in what's happening at 5-8 now, and we can just continue to support and dig deeper into instruction, I think we're at a timely place to switch our efforts to K3, and that's a big swath as well. But I know that teachers are chomping at the bit for it as well, because they've seen what's happening and they've seen the changes that are happening at 5th or 8th, and they're like, well, okay, what about the rest of us? And because everyone knows that we're due to make some changes, so people are ready for it. We just have to lay the plan out. So it is ambitious, but I feel like most of our efforts are going to be pre-K3, and I think we can navigate that. I think we can, once we start digging into it, we can maybe flesh out the timeline a little bit more, but I think we can take it on.
We're also looking at the different initiatives, and we're looking at different district leaders working with different grade levels. So for example, on page 55, the K-8 disciplinary literacy, our plan would be that social studies and science would take the lead on that with grades 6 through 8 next year. So really trying to work across not just literacy, but math, all the curricular areas. You'll hear from Jess in just a moment, so that we're not, so that we're pacing the change for our team, but also making sure that we're not asking principals and teachers in schools to take on 6 major initiatives. So we're taking a look at grade bands and what makes sense at which grade bands and teachers for schools, so that we're pacing it with them as well. So you're looking at a lot of things getting started, but we've thought carefully about how to pace that.
Yeah. But I think it's a good push for us to ask the question, what's on the to-do list that we really want to focus on as we address the achievement and accountability concerns that we have, and what's on the not to-do list. And I hear that loud and clear. And if our compelling argument is everything is on the to-do list, well, then we're going to have to do everything on the to-do list. But I think we have to really focus and discipline ourselves to actually be able to answer that question.
I just have one question. I mean, it's not really a question because I may miss an answer. First of all, thanks. I mean, this area is so critical to really achieving our students. So thank you for pulling us together and coming back again to talk to us. You mentioned something in the presentation that I had missed and came up with the Making Meaning pilot. You said that was for 3rd grade with 60 teachers or something like that?
K3.
Yeah, K3. So what would be the next step with that? Did you guys talk, did you talk about what would then happen after? Because obviously the pilot is expansion. It might grow. Is that, like, once it's pilot, what happens after it's no longer a pilot?
Right. That's a good question.
It's evaluated.
Yeah.
And, I mean, what's the hope? I mean,
well, I think based on, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I think the hope is that we learn from the implementation in the 3 schools.
Six
schools,
60 teachers, yeah.
What works, what doesn't work, and
then if it works, it would be expanded to the other school.
Potentially.
It just, to me, it sounds like an integrated approach to many issues, so.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
My turn. Thank you very much for the presentation. There were two issues that came up last year when we had the same discussion that I would like to revisit because I'm not entirely sure where we stand on them. The first was I believe the early push is so critical in our kindergarten readiness. I also think preparing kids for high school is so critical. And when we left this discussion last spring, we talked about the fact that our philosophy is managed choice and building stamina in the middle schools. And yet when these kids hit 9th grade, they're reading Shakespeare, Dickens, Salman Rushdie, very difficult texts. And we talked about what are we going to do explicitly to get the kids ready for these texts, because it's not managed choice when you get to mixed honors humanities. Everyone reads those texts. So what have we done in the last year to prepare kids for these kinds of assignments? Because I've heard, you know, from the 9th grade teachers that we really need to be doing more.
Well, I think since then we've really, like we said, there's the managed choice piece, but there's also the mentor text piece that kind of anchors the students' reading. And those pieces, I don't have any off the top of my head right now to share with you at the 8th grade, but those pieces of text, the teachers really, since we've had our text complexity discussion last year, they've really, I think, been much more thoughtful about the sorts of texts that they're sharing with the kids in our shared piece. And then beyond that, what happens is the students are asked to write a literary analysis for each piece. And so within that, the students are being asked to create a thesis, use evidence and reasoning, counterclaim, rebuttal. So they're going through all those processes that are addressed, I think, at the high school. And so they're asked to, again, to do that level of thinking around the pieces of text that they're reading. I know that the teachers do expose, the 8th grade teachers do expose students to Shakespeare throughout the year. So those pieces the teachers do attend to that. So
what
there's
are the
that.
anchor texts for 6th, 7th, and 8th
That's
grade?
like I said, I'm drawing a blank right now on, didn't have that written down in my notes. I'm drawing a blank.
I do want to build off what you said because I think I'm a little confused because I'm glad you brought up the point. I know that was some of the feedback we had heard, and what you were asking for is what's changed. What I heard you, and I may have misunderstood, and maybe you can just clarify, that I heard you say there hadn't been changes at those grade levels in terms of expectations and curriculum and such. So I'm not sure if you can kind of reconcile those.
But I think one of the things that's changed, like I said, because the curriculum hasn't, the expectation, the curriculum has not changed, but what happens within the units of study have changed. And so the content has continued to evolve. The sorts of essential questions and essential understandings that students are being asked to draw out of text have been ramped up. And the anchor texts, like I said, I'm like at a loss at the moment right now in terms of calling up an example, but I can easily
That's great.
just get that, for you. But, so like I said, the curriculum itself hasn't, but the content, there's the curriculum and then there's the content. So I think that's what continues to change and evolve.
And I heard you say something about teachers using Shakespeare. Is that just their choice, or is there as an example, is a Shakespearean book one of the anchor texts? Whether it's one that, not looking for the specific title, but I'm just wondering if it's optional or if it's a consistent experience.
It's a
for the
consistent
students.
experience across the.
So there is a Shakespeare play that everyone reads in 8th grade, or?
No, people do different things. Number one, across 8th grade, they'll do sonnets, they'll do a play. I know it's also addressed in drama as well, so they're reading Shakespeare in drama and performing. So I know it's in those areas.
Okay.
So they're exposed to it, so that they understand what the.
I think one of the concerns that I think Tracy and I share, though, is that when they get into high school, all that freedom, all that independence, they have to be disciplined enough to say, I don't want to read Tale of Two Cities. I hate this book, but yet they are going to read it and they're going to study it. And how are we really getting them ready to do that? Because that's a different mindset.
Right. Well, again, I think, there are mentor texts that anchor these units of study. But aren't they short? Some are short. They're short stories. They're informational pieces. There's at least one whole class novel across all the grades.
Is it still The Outsiders in 7th?
For some it is. That's a
teacher
choice. Yeah. Yep.
And maybe the way to talk about this too, and we have continued, to talk about the need, because at some point you don't have the choice, and when does that choice, and some of that could be developmental too. When do you, choice may be still important in middle school, but we want them to have the complexity, so they're important, right? You guys are working on, articulation, you work together with the 9th grade teachers, correct? So it'd be interesting to hear what they are saying about it, what they see students, especially the ones that are coming in this year and then next year, what they're seeing. Are they seeing the changes? I don't know how you measure it. So I'd love to see the list of the books. I'm interested in the anchor text. That's what it is, and everybody else is. But then also, how the two, since we are seamless, how the teachers in 9th grade are working with middle school to say, what are they saying to you, and what can be done with issues of complexity.
I think this might be an interesting thing to bring to the joint committee, because I have heard from 9th grade teachers a feeling that the kids aren't exposed to complex enough text, and maybe if we could bring some of those teachers and they could articulate what they think would be helpful for preparation for 9th grade, then that dialogue, it seems like we need to still explore where that mismatch.
And I think this gets to the comment I made earlier in terms of getting input from 202 and thinking of a K-12 spectrum, and it just might shift some of the things that we're doing, in particular at those middle school levels. But I'm not the expert to know what those changes may be, but I think your suggestion is a really good one.
Yep, I can definitely talk with the middle school, the high school.
My one other topic that we also talked about last spring, and I really appreciate the grammar presentation, because I've been asking about this for the last couple of years. My problem is that we have had really great presentations on grammar that's been taught, but there's been a disconnect over the years of what we've seen that's explicitly taught in the schools, and then what we hear from parents that's actually taught. So there's either a problem with consistency across the district, or because it is taught individually and it's not really, maybe it's becoming more of a whole class lesson. But in the past it's been described, but at the end of the discussion last spring, we did explicitly ask for an evaluation at 5th and 8th grade to see where we were. And then when I see that there's a self-evaluation as opposed to an evaluation or assessment, I'm very disappointed in that, because I think until we know where we are in terms of what the kids know, we're not going to know how much more work we have to do. And we still really have no idea where we are, because we haven't had any sort of assessment that I can see that would give us any data to build on.
So just help me understand then, what would an assessment?
A test.
A test?
Yeah.
Okay.
When you're talking about evaluation going forward, I was under the assumption that that's what you were building.
Well, that's what we had asked for last spring, for a test to say, okay, in 5th grade, do the kids know on this checklist what we think and what we think we've been teaching effectively? Do they know it? At the end of 8th grade, do they know the gerund? Do they know the participle phrase? All the things that we say we've been teaching. If we can demonstrate that, then we are doing what we say we're doing. If we haven't, then we need to rethink how we're teaching it. So, but at this point, we still don't know whether this has been effective or not.
It's a really interesting question, because I was thinking about this. When you get to the ACT, of course, there's a whole English section that is really kind of grammar driven. Do any of our current, or the PARC or any of the other tests, really look just at the area of grammar? Any of our current assessments?
PARC, you mean our formal, like MAP, or PARC does not. MAP does not.
Yeah,
that's a great. I mean, I'm sure teacher by teacher, do teachers have their own assessments of it? I mean, how does...
Yeah, I mean, you saw, some samples tonight of what teachers are doing. And like I said earlier, I think the grammar piece, like I said, we've been spending some time on other aspects of the curriculum, and just more recently we brought grammar back into the focus, and it's been evolving. And I think our current status is that we're getting into these much more concrete sort of, that checklist actually, if you looked at it in depth, it actually is it's an assessment. It's kind of a quick assessment of what the expectations are and what kids can currently demonstrate they know. And then that becomes the goal setting, because by the end of the year, everything should be for a given grade level should be in the...
The reason is the teacher doing that, or is the student doing
both,
that? So I'm still not
both.
clear on.
Both are.
The reason that I have focused on grammar, and I continue to, is I really do believe it's an equity issue, because when kids take the ACT, and you talk to grammar, you talk to any ACT tutors, and there's so many out there, they say the thing that all these kids need is grammar tutoring. And so the kids that go out and pay for the ACT tutoring are getting that grammar that they need to do well in the ACT. But that's our job. We should be teaching them. They shouldn't be paying tutors, because the kids that can't pay for tutoring for the ACT are not doing well in that area.
Right.
And I really think it's our responsibility to send these kids to high school with some.
And if you look at the Common Core standards in 8th grade, you have to teach the difference between active and passive. And that's a very important skill to know the difference of when you write.
Right.
But to teach it, there is so much you have to know, for kids to learn it. I mean, something sounds silly, but I ran across a lot of students who could not pick out the verb in a sentence, the subject in a sentence. They didn't know what a direct object was, yet all these terms are necessary for showing them how to change an active sentence to a passive sentence and vice versa. And so I'm heartened to hear that we're doing more of that, but it's really got to be articulated through.
Absolutely.
I think, because I do agree with your observations, and I actually refrained from making grammar comments because I knew that you would take up that charge for us. Seeing the examples is interesting, and seeing the quotes that came from the students talking about how they're engaged is interesting. But to me, there is that gap, right? So you even noted it, I think, in the report. We see students are engaged, but the achievement doesn't reflect the teacher's commitment and what we're seeing. And I think that's why I go to the evaluation, because for me, these isolated examples of quotes from students or the teachers that are, you have some examples from, they're interesting, but from a system level, I don't know that they tell us what is consistently occurring or not occurring in the schools. And that's, when I think about the evaluation, that's what I want to know at a board level. They're great to see, but what's happening consistently across the system? Because my sense is that, we're not seeing that grammar instruction occur consistently across the district.
Any other questions? Okay, thanks. So maybe we'll have an FYI on some of these issues. That we
Definitely.
brought up after. So, all right, now on to Matt.
Hi. Thank you, everyone, for giving me the time to provide some updates on mathematics. So you have the memo in front of you, so my apologies in advance for the slides. The slides were the appendix that I referred to in the memo, so my apologies for not including that earlier. I want to speak specifically to this image of some scales of balance, and think about the fact that coming in July, that what we're hoping is that we have scales that are balanced, where we're thinking about short-term decisions and how we support them, as well as thinking about how we build a foundation for the future. In the beginning of my time coming here in July till probably October-ish, much of my time was really spent around mathematics acceleration and course placement, and how to help support, the various needs that were bubbling up in the surface from that. But also at the same time, there is a proactive approach of, engaging the, different stakeholders within the community, both principals, teachers, ETHS, as well as other community members, to get a sense of, what successes we've had, what challenges we're facing, to get a complete picture as much as possible of this work. I would say sometime around October, late October, early November, we were able to start balancing the scales back towards thinking about a long-term planning and building a foundation for the work we're doing in mathematics. And with that in mind, it's important to consider that you have to think about it from the frame of student achievement and how we're doing as a district. And so looking at the Accountability and Achievement Report and other data out there, it's important to help paint the picture to inform the work that we're doing. So without getting into too much detail, we recognize that, we have quite a bit of, students that are meeting college readiness standards, but we also have students that over the last 4 years have not been meeting college readiness, and that has actually decreased, as well as students that are showing a decrease in making nationally normed games for both low and high performing students. Ultimately, there's a persistent achievement gap, and so all of these pieces around the data and around pieces that you brought up in an earlier conversation are things that we need to keep in mind and that definitely need to inform the work we're doing moving forward. So with that in mind, I wanted to be able to share with you updates on the major work that we are doing in mathematics. These are the ones that we're really feeling help support meeting our goals and improving our data. The first that I'm going to share with you is around STEM education and vision. Even though that's not specifically mathematics, my role as STEM director is important such that we need to actually define what we mean by STEM. But within that, we also have to think about what does a staff infrastructure mean and how do we support the work that we're doing. And then more specifically to curriculum and instruction is how we're developing supports for all students, how we're thinking about core instruction and the work that we're doing around transitioning to Everyday Mathematics, the 4th edition, and Connected Mathematics Program, the 3rd edition. There's also pieces around acceleration and a great pilot that we're doing around the math fluency tutors. Before I move on into the subsequent slides, I do want to point out that brought up similarly in comments made by many of you is that there are quite a bit of number of work streams that we're working on. This merely highlights the major ones, but there's a number of others that I'm not going to be digging into for the sake of time. So moving forward, and I recognize that there's much text here on the STEM education vision, but what we've done here is we've really met internally with the team to kind of think about what do we mean by STEM education and how does that then inform the work we're doing in mathematics and in science and in other pieces that we may build around STEM. I think the biggest takeaway from this is the fact that we're really thinking about this from an inquiry-based approach and how we really define that, girded under the Common Core standards and the Next Generation Science standards, and how we're really building that. So if this is the draft vision for STEM in the district, then what are the fundamental aspects? What are the major pieces that align to it? And so the first that we'd say is that math and science are indeed the core of D65 STEM education, that it is the foundation, but that technology and engineering as STEM disciplines in and of themselves both support and connect each other to math and science. And then what's very important to understand here is that the STEM community is a collaborative learning community, that it's not just about thinking and baking out ideas here in D65, but also thinking about how we're leveraging and learning from other folks that are doing STEM-like work, including the high school. So then if you think about it from a macro umbrella and really break it down and distill it to critical components within STEM education, the critical places that we landed on as far as where we'd hang our hat and our efforts is around how we build a leadership and a culture for learning, high quality math and science instruction that I previously talked about, how we're building our staff capacity, not just thinking about what pedagogical skills are we doing in mathematics, but also thinking about how that plays out in science and how that plays out generally across all STEM disciplines. But important to an idea of STEM education is opportunities for STEM in school as well as opportunities for STEM out of school. And so even though this is in a draft form, and we really thought it was important to invest some time in thinking about what does STEM mean and how that is going to play a real big role in the work that we do across time. So going into mathematics specifically, building the infrastructure and understanding, you know, the support that we had in the work that we were doing was really important. Coming in July, most of my positions, in fact, all of my positions that were coaching positions, basically supporting in-school instruction and things of that nature. What was really important, you know, in the experience that I've had in the past is, you know, it's important to build this common language about instructional expectations and guidance around the work that we do in the district, to build the kind of consistency, the common language that's needed to have, you know, consistent teaching that's not just happening in pockets of success, but rather across the entire district, from classroom to classroom and from school to school. So important to build a team that would be able to have the function of thinking through and grappling with the ideas around how we develop those instructional expectations, how we provide guidance around curriculum, assessment, intervention, those types of things. And being a former coach and being both a former, you know, curriculum writer, I know that the job as doing both is really difficult. So important to be able to add those pieces to the staff. And it's because of adding the 2 new math specialist positions, one at K-5 and one at 6-8, that the remainder of the updates that I'm sharing with you are actually possible. So I want to talk about one major piece of work that we're doing called the MTSS Mathematics Framework. And before we get into the EduSpeak and the ease of education jargon, I want to go ahead and kind of parse out what MTSS is. It's an acronym for Multi-Tiered Systems of Support. And in a lot of realms of education, you may hear the term RTI also thrown out as response to intervention. What's important to note is that a multi-tiered systems of support include RTI as part of the umbrella that serves the overarching piece. MTSS also includes the behavior aspect of how we support all students to be successful in the work that they're doing in schools. What's important to note is that MTSS is a frame from which we support all groups of learners in the work that we're doing in mathematics. And so it's not just about thinking about general education, it's not just thinking about students that are struggling, it's not just thinking about students that are accelerating, but rather it's thinking about the full spectrum of all students and how are we supporting those students. So what's important to note is that, you know, there needs to be a common language around how we approach that. So we're in the midst of a development of a framework that really starts to get at that articulation. So what does it mean? I mean, if we know that the Common Core ends up being the what we actually are teaching our students, and how are we actually doing that? And how are we actually doing that in a way that doesn't target just one set of students, but targets all students? So when you think about response to intervention, it's not just limited to the general ed core instruction, but it also includes how we're supporting our struggling learners, and how we know that we're actually making progress with our students and adequate growth. So the idea around this is that it provides guidance on the how-to for that. It's a very tremendous undertaking, and one that is not just relegated to thinking about a framework or a document that says we've got it all covered. Because part of the next steps here is that we realize that developing this is important for the articulation piece and for the common language that we can all speak across our schools and across our teachers. But I want you to also notice that there's a word there called beta version, and it's with the idea and in the spirit of continued improvement that we would have some baseline from which to operate, but then as we're working and learning from the work that we're doing, how do we make adjustments over time to continue to refine and make it a framework that really does serve all students? Important to note that one of the next steps here is that it's not just about a tangible framework, because a tangible framework, nothing jumps out of there to say we're going to solve it all in one day. It's important to understand that there are other pieces here that need to be considered, such as the current infrastructure and what does that look like? What does the assessment plan look like? And are we really, understanding what our students know and be able to do? What intervention materials and strategies do we have to support our students that are struggling? PD support, all those kinds of things are part of the eventual plan, but it starts with having this common language to begin. So in the spirit of MTSS or RTI. One of the major pieces around that is core instruction. And core instruction is defined as what happens that's fully guaranteed for all students across the spectrum. And so our core instruction materials are Everyday Mathematics 4 and CMP 3. We are transitioning into the 4th edition of Everyday Math, whereby we have K2 implementing it for the first time at non-TWE schools. And at 6-8, we're using the Connected Mathematics Program 3, where we're doing that across all schools. We're supporting professional development with our teachers through a partnership with the University of Chicago for EM4 and UIC for CMP3. But what's important in next steps is thinking about the scalability and the fact that if we're doing K2 EM4 at non-TWE schools, what does that then look like for next year when we scale to K5 all schools? And the continued efforts around how we're continuing to look through our program and our practices to ensure that we're providing robust core instruction for all of our students. Fitting within the MTSS frame is differentiation, and I know that differentiation is a major piece that was brought up earlier. And one avenue for such differentiation is to provide supports for students that are well prepared to move on to accelerated courses. But in thinking through things and having experienced the earlier part of my year, expensed quite a bit on mathematics acceleration and placement, really spoke loudly to the kinds of things that we need to do to update it and to make the process a little more clear. So I propose to you the idea of what we're doing here with acceleration, and though it is high level and intended to be as such, we have 3 phases to kind of thinking about our updates. But the major goal here is to think about how we're defining the course sequence and the pathway for students. I'd love to think about this less about 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, or 5th through 8th grade, but more about what does the K-12 articulation of mathematics look like. And so to that end, there have been meetings, actually monthly meetings that I've had with ETHS around these ideas around not just acceleration, but around high quality mathematics writ large. But speaking specifically to acceleration, if we need to redefine the course sequence as articulated by the Common Core as well as through our colleagues over at ETHS, what does that also mean about our placement criteria and our process for doing that? So important to note in the call out in this red box here is that the process for doing that started with our very own teachers, given the fact that they are very much invested in the work that we're doing here and have been living, breathing, around this work for some time. And thinking about how working with a core group of teachers, they can come up with some baseline recommendations around what our challenges are and how we might propose to address them. But it doesn't start just with teachers and end there. We also have to think about what does that mean for other constituents. So the next step after kind of thinking through recommendations with our teachers was also to engage members of our administration, including principals, but also to have a very open dialogue with ETHS about what does this mean, thinking about it from a K-12 perspective. And then tomorrow night I have a very small group meeting with some community members as well to share essentially where the baseline recommendations have landed, get their feedback around what those ideas present to them, and then essentially synthesize all these ideas and feedback from the multi-layers of constituents and get a sense of what that means for this work moving forward. From phase 1, it really basically distills into how we build awareness, not just with our own staff, but with the community. Very important to do that, but as well with our colleagues at ETHS. And then phase 3 really kind of takes on the next layer of work that we're doing after having communicated that. What does that then mean about our student placement processes and going after making that very clear and transparent? But what does it also mean for our curriculum work in terms of middle grades mathematics and our professional development? So that's a high-level update on acceleration. One of the major things that we're doing and that many folks are really excited about is the pilot for the Math Fluency Tutors program. So Suni, thank you so much for bringing this forward to our attention. We're really excited about the idea of it. Essentially, from a high level, there's a Reading Fluency Tutors program that I've learned about and that has flourished to 140 plus tutors, I believe, at my last conversation with Michelle. And so the idea was, well, if reading is reaping such great benefits around, this kind of support, well, what might that look like in mathematics? And so the idea was to think about what a pilot might look like and understanding kind of the differences in both approach and content of mathematics versus literacy. What does that then mean about program design? So the pilot was launched in February 2015, includes about 17 grade 1 classrooms across 6 schools. There's somewhere thereabouts around 20 volunteers, and I think from coffee this morning with Michelle, it looks like there's about 23 or 24 now, so looking like that's growing. But the idea here is that we're focusing in with grade 1, thinking about what struggling learners might need in terms of their mathematics fluency, particularly with computation. But a pilot is not a pilot if you're not thinking about what that then means about scalability and what you learn from it. So next steps are really, to kind of get an idea of what kind of impact does a pilot actually have, but not just on student success and student achievement, but also among the various strands of work that are going to be happening in this. So part of the idea then was, from the learning of that, is what recommendations emerge from that, and what kind of plan or recommendation for scalability might emerge from the learnings of it. But already in the meeting that I had with Michelle and Sonia, one of our K-5 math specialists today, it was pretty apparent that course corrections and continued improvement from feedback is already happening. So I've asked Michelle and Sonia to include that as regular, ongoing, monthly dialogue for us to continue to think about what this means about our work moving forward and learn from it. So I'd like to end with talking about how we're framing this against the very important strategic plan. And even though it's still in draft form, the idea was always to think about this work in the context of the strategic plan. That one of the major things is that we have to think about a high quality mathematics program for all students, and that's really centered on equity. We have to think about that as our main agenda. And the challenge is that though we have quite a pocket of students that are doing really well, is how do we sustain that? But at the same time, how do we help support our struggling learners so that all students are having access to high quality mathematics and moving forward in their learning? We've also learned from the strategic planning process that time and resource are very real factors to consider. And in the work that I've been doing since July, I've recognized that very quickly and want to keep that as part of the grounding of the work that we're doing, speaking specifically to the comments that were made earlier about how much can we bite off and actually do meaningfully is a really important factor in thinking about this work. And then finally, overall, it's the idea of how do we make sure that all of the work that we're doing is not disconnected and is connected within a general frame for the work that we're doing. So thinking about this in the frame of the strategic plan, thinking about this from a frame of a multi-tiered systems of support for all students is extremely, extremely important, and basically the charge of the work that I'm doing moving forward. So again, thank you for your time. And hopefully this helped to clarify some of the major questions that you may have had in your mind as you read the memo.
Thank you. All right, questions?
Thank you, Jeff. I first wanted to open up with two thank yous to you and your team. One related to the Math Fluency Program. I think it's an idea that started bubbling up from the community 2 years ago, and having sat through the training for the tutors, although I didn't get to the next step of getting in the classroom yet, but it was amazing to me how well developed the curriculum was and the approach, and Michelle and Sonia both are doing a wonderful job.
We must give credit to the two of them. Yeah. They are doing some very heavy lifting.
They're both fabulous, and so I was my socks were blown off by sitting in this course of training for a volunteer in our district. And so I think it's a huge leverage point because we have so many parents, community members who really want to be part of helping our students. So thank you for embracing that and making it come to fruition. I think it's going to be really successful. And I think related to that, your focus on RTI, I mean, I didn't know MTSS, but I know RTI, so I'll just use that acronym. I think about a year ago, it became clear to me that we did not have a real strong framework for RTI and math and intervention in math, and that was an aha for me personally. And I think that it's really hard work, obviously, what you're doing. I think we're going to be continuing to be challenged now when we have a framework, as we had talked offline about how do you resource that, because RTI plans require instructional intervention, and instructional intervention requires resource to do that. So, but you've identified just two clear kind of areas that we had for improvement, and have hit the ground running on those. So thank you so much, and your team.
Yes.
My questions are sometimes, I don't know, I must be kind of echoing Jennifer, but I had my points down before she got up and made these comments earlier, but they're similar in some veins. One, my first question was really around differentiations, more specifically, in terms of, how do we operate? I had expected maybe some focus on how do we operationalize differentiation within the math content area, because I've seen, and I think on a lot of feedback that we've gotten is we've operationalized it to a large degree in literacy by virtue of the way the curriculum works, and yet we have not done that in math. And so, so do you have thoughts on where that might fit in this larger, grander framework?
Absolutely. I'm so glad you asked it. So one of the major things, and what's difficult to sometimes parse out in a high-level update, is some of the detail. And within the MTSS framework, or the RTI framework that we're going to call it, one of the major pieces centers around how we deliver high-quality core instruction, Tier 1 instruction for all students. A major emphasis in kind of the way that we're conceptualizing the structure of the framework is around some implementation keys. And what questions then are the major questions or statements that one would answer in order to meet those implementation keys. It's difficult to talk about core instruction, guaranteed Tier 1 core instruction for all, without actually talking about differentiation and supporting all students. So within that, we actually have a section that we're working on that explicitly talks about differentiation. Now the trick here ends up being, and I'm going to be quite frank in what much research says out there, but also what my own experience as a classroom teacher tells me, and that is the term differentiation is quite widely defined across the spectrum. And so we have to think about what is the operating definition of differentiation, because I actually feel that it manifests itself in a number of different ways. There's differentiation within instruction materials that you have and strategies that might be able to be gleaned to support different learners. But there's also differentiation within the context of how you group students, how you think about the different strategies within the context of instruction materials that you're doing, and so forth and so on. So what we're going to try to do in as best a way that we can to articulate it within the framework is to define what we mean by differentiation, the different manifestations that it could potentially take, with the idea that we would say we have some really great core instruction materials, and by the way, there's a number of great differentiation options within them. But to your point of operationalization, do we know across a district consistently and clearly that all of these differentiation options actually do exist? Not only do they exist, but to what purpose are they serving in support of students? But then beyond that, and beyond the scope of instructional materials, instructional materials help support how students are provided access to instruction. But it's the combination of what you're teaching with the actual pedagogy behind it. So being able to define how we marry the two is going to be extremely important. So that's a very long-winded answer for your question, but ultimately differentiation will be defined within the framework, and the operationalization of it is really going to happen over time as schools and other folks start to react to the differentiation and use that within conversations, both in across grade levels and across buildings.
So where would you see that? I know it will happen over time, but when would you see that starting in terms of looking potentially differently in how we approach it? How we approach?
No, I think that's a fair question. I mean, I think it's two-pronged. I think the idea of thinking about how we build the kind of communication and professional development around building general awareness of what's there, and then professional development to help support teachers is an important critical step. But I think what's also important is, being able to communicate and share that with our community and our parents to have a sense of what do we mean by differentiation. But then the part two to that ends up being, so if we've defined it, if we've built awareness, if we've provided professional development, and expect that to matriculate into practice and supporting of all students, then when does that phase take over, and how are we able to measure that? And I think this is something that will take some time within this work, but my firm sense of this is that we can begin at least the articulation of it, as well as the build out of how we start to infuse various aspects of it, even in year one, which I would call next year.
Mm-hmm. And so then I had a couple questions more around acceleration specifically. Mm-hmm. And this, you mentioned the course sequence piece. I was hoping, and in the memo it was mentioned as well, I was hoping you could elaborate on that a little bit more for us who, we're not steeped in the differences with Common Core standards, and what do you mean by a change in course sequence, and then how does that connect to having an impact on acceleration as we see it today?
No, I think no, that's a good question. And it's one of those detail pieces that I was talking about that's difficult to get through in slides, so I'm happy to answer that. Currently, the course sequence, when we think about it, let's think about it from the terms of different pathways that students can take through their mathematics learning throughout the course of their educational careers. And right now, the major thing to consider is that when we think about the shift to Common Core, we have to understand the emphasis on deep conceptualization and an understanding of the mathematics and how to apply that within your learning. But we also have to take into account the fact that does our course sequence actually support that piece? One of the things that we're finding, both in terms of having conversations with our colleagues here at 65 and at 202, as well as with parents' concerns that I've received over time, is the fact that students that are accelerated, many of them they have content gaps, and much of that is due to course skipping as our major emphasis or MO for acceleration. So in any given place in the course sequence, a lot of ways that students are progressing is from 4th to 6th grade mathematics, from 5th to 7th, from 6th to Algebra 1, and much of the major foundational content that's skipped ends up being problematic. So that was one of the major things that I wanted to visit with a number of constituents, and through the conversations that I've had, seemed to resonate loud and clear with a number of folks in terms of that being a major challenge. So the course sequence is important so that we're getting a sense of what is the pathway. Are we making sure that students going through an advanced or an accelerated sequence that we're setting them up to have the major underpinnings of the foundational knowledge that's required for them to access later courses in higher and advanced levels of mathematics. And then, beyond that, is then what does that mean about our student placement criteria? Because that is absolutely critical in determining how are we defining a well-prepared student to be able to take those courses? Is it about, do you need to have command of the next level content that you're about to skip so that you can access the next layer of learning? Or is it about command of what you currently know and that you can take an accelerated pace, not skipping any major content? So that was a major point of conversation within these talks.
Okay.
And it's a conversation that you're having with the high school.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So I guess the data analysis piece does relate to that because with the recommendations that you're going to be putting forth and then gathering feedback on, I'm curious as to what data analysis has been done to look at the longer term, trajectory of those students and parse it out from when they skipped, because it may have a very different outcome, just having gone through it with my own student.
No, absolutely.
It means a lot different thing if you're skipping 6th grade or 7th grade versus some of the fundamentals earlier on. So when we make some of these assertions around students do more poorly later on, I wonder whether that is across the board, or if you look at the data, is it depending on when they did the skipping? Can it be, is there more, have you done a deeper analysis, I guess is the broader question, of the data to help inform these recommendations, or has it been more based on discussion?
It's been mostly based on discussion, although we are looking at the data to get a sense of those trends. And part of that work is in talking with with our high school colleagues, was the way that they're looking through and thinking about the trajectory of data and how that backwards maps from particular courses that students are taking at the high school level. So using that as kind of one of the major data points of reference is kind of getting some sense of longitudinal data around where students land with respect to their course taking and successful course taking at that, and what does that mean about where they entered from given points in time.
Yeah, so they don't necessarily know though when, they know what they may have or don't have, but they don't necessarily know how that student got there. And I think that's probably potentially a missing link of, connecting those dots.
Absolutely.
Okay. And so my last question then was, the other piece of one of the comments in the acceleration was around, I guess it's the context of opportunities for minority students to take advanced mathematics courses, which we certainly all want to work towards. And I'm wondering, what does that mean? Is that advanced mathematics courses at the high school level, or is that meaning within the group of students that are being accelerated?
It means
or both?
Being very intentional about equal opportunities for all students.
So
at whatever grade level, at whatever band you're at.
So I certainly the opportunity is there. I'm wondering whether we're looking at specifically at programs like Project Excite and how, because they're designed to identify, kind of advanced learners or accelerated learners in math, and tracking and identifying whether they are really successful in moving these students, and if so, what might of that model that we could expand, that partnership that we could expand, because it's currently only in a small number of schools, something that looks at the identifying those students earlier on and doing the nurturing. So, because I think that would be one area that we could build on. My concern is when we are looking at data that says only right now 11% of our black students are at college career readiness, we've got to be working on that to equalize the opportunities. I mean, that's the issue, right? That we need to better prepare our students is the issue, and potentially also identifying, where are there students that for some reason have this potential and aren't getting the opportunity for sure. But it seems like the bigger concern is focusing on earlier intervention and preparing those students so that they can meet the levels that they need to meet to access. It's not an opportunity question as much to me, based on the data I've seen, as it is we are not preparing all of those students to succeed at that level. So I think I would need to understand a little bit more of what the opportunity problem is versus the preparedness, and then potentially us doing a better job of identifying high potential minority students and nurturing and cultivating them, so to make sure that we have a bigger pipeline.
Absolutely.
So just my reaction.
And just a sidebar on this, Project Excite, from what I know, is potentially shifting its methodology and going to be focusing more on middle school rather than the earlier grades.
Oh, really?
And we're just in early conversations as they've started to change a little bit. Still very interested in working. We are with them. And
I
indeed.
wonder why that is. I wonder why that is.
That I don't know. I wasn't in the meeting this morning, so I just know that there was a meeting this morning, and the engagement was around a shift to more of the middle grades.
That's all from me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll find out.
Okay.
I just had a couple quick comments. Thank you for the presentation. Welcome to a board meeting. And a couple things. I was glad to see that you had built in some change management, which I think is really critical, in particular, as it relates to the acceleration piece. You probably have this intended, I don't know if I missed it on the slide, in terms of coming to the board for input before we start building awareness. I think because this is a topic that has gotten a lot of board attention over the last couple of years, before we roll anything out, I think we just would want to take a look once you've developed some of the specifics, make sure there aren't any potholes along the way based on the last couple of years of discussions. And, evaluation. So as, again, you build out the details, I think we'll all be interested to just see how you're looking to evaluate the success. So,
absolutely.
But thank you for everything that you shared.
Well, I don't have much. For like Candace, although Candace apparently you're aware of this, the RTI multiple system way before I did. I think I just assumed. That you had these like systems of support. So first, that framework was really helpful, not just for understanding, but what's going to happen. I think in terms of the achievement and understanding of kids in mathematics by having that focus. So thank you for that. And, I have one question, and Candace got to it, but it's the scope and sequencing issue of the curriculum. And I guess if you were to say, like, what is your goal for students in mathematics in this district? Is it just to move the 40, not just to, because to me, I look at the 40%, I would say my goal is that it would be not 40%, it would be 100% of kids are college and career ready, right? But we're spending a lot of time talking about acceleration, which are those kids who are already at 40%. And so if you were looking at scope and sequence, right? I'm putting these two together, so work with me here. If I look at what the Common Core says for mathematics, right? What kids need to have by the end of 8th grade, and what they need to have by the end of 11th grade, right? Is that putting them on track for college and career readiness benchmarks, right? If you have what?
Yes.
So that would be at 8th grade, what we're teaching right now in 8th grade math. Is that kind of what the Common Core is?
Absolutely.
So it's to those 60% of our students who aren't there that we want to make sure that they're getting what they need, right? The 40% are meeting that, right?
The college readiness mark, yes.
I mean, just to me, that really stands up to where our time should be spent. I mean, if you look at time and resources, correct?
Yes.
All right. So I just challenge us to do that because those are resources, time and money are resources. And I guess maybe what you're saying is this year, once you get the acceleration in place by the committee, and then after that, our time and energy will be spent on that 60%.
That's exactly where I'm trying to go, yes.
Because one of the things you also said was interesting to me, I hadn't thought about that. Are kids missing that gap of what they're missing when they're accelerated, right? So they get, because I know, I used to have a friend who always used to say, to what end is acceleration, to what end, right? It's to be challenged, right? But is it so that you're taking BC Calc sophomore year? Is it so you're taking it in your junior year? Well, to what end, right? It's that we have developed kids who love math, feel comfortable with numbers, they're literate in math, and they're going to go on to that next level. Isn't that what the goal is?
Absolutely, but I think to your point about, to what end are students missing things, through skipping. I mean, I can illustrate, a couple of examples, but I mean, one that sticks out in my mind specifically is around grade 7 mathematics, and the fact that, it is the one area where we really start to focus on building a really strong base in conceptual knowledge of linearity and linear functions particularly, that if a student didn't have that as a solid grounding and skipped 7th grade mathematics, while from a procedural perspective, you may get it at first, at some point, the conceptual aspect of what a slope actually means, or what various aspects of a linear actually get you versus positive, negative slope, and all those different ideas around it, potentially start to fall apart as you dig deeper into the mathematics. So what ends up happening by virtue of skipping courses is that there's an over-reliance on procedural knowledge and how do I answer get? Versus how do I grapple with the mathematics and think about it from the perspective of applying what I know, understanding very deeply the pieces that are important to know from a conceptual basis to be able to apply them in multiple ways, in multiple situations and problems, not just in mathematics, but in every walk of life, so to speak. I mean, another area that I think about specifically is in 5th and 6th grade, and the fact that, there's quite a bit of research out there that really points to having such a command of fractions and proportional reasoning as kind of a gateway to being able to access advanced mathematics, particularly Algebra 1, just Algebra 1 in particular, right? So in 5th grade mathematics, you really formalize and start to really build the depth of your understanding around fraction operation with multiplication, and then it extends itself in 6th grade with division, not to mention the real kind of underpinnings of what we mean by proportional relationships. And proportional relationships becomes extremely important as we lead into Algebra 1. You could consider that as the language of algebra when you really get into it. So from a content skipping perspective, what you sacrifice in skipping a whole year is students potentially missing out on building that foundation for important concepts that will be expected to have been learned when you enter or access the next level mathematics course.
I just hadn't never thought of that. It makes it complicated, I guess, whether you decide.
No, absolutely.
I mean, how you measure whether you're going to accelerate somebody, whether they really understand those concepts before they do that.
It also puts into question just the philosophy of when you open up the pipeline, or when you open the funnel, right? I mean, because we have an acceleration program that is very narrow, wide, right at that level where skipping 7th grade. So, notwithstanding an alternative which might be to pace, do it differently and not do skipping at all, there's also a question of, is there a better way to accelerate? Because my experience wasn't, maybe this has changed, but last year 6th grade was very repetitive of 5th grade, at least the content. Yet you're not accelerating many kids then, you're doing it in the 7th grade year. So looking at those gaps, even
just remember that we're updating the curriculum.
No, I understand. I'm
So
just saying
last
based on
year's
last
6th grade
year, just
curriculum
as
is
using an
different this
illustrative example.
The repetitive nature of the curriculum is somewhat, isn't that part of the curriculum? Or is it?
So
I was gonna wait to the end, but can I just jump in with some historical
absolutely.
context? Before we began the grade skipping, we used to have a program called Gateways. Do you know Gateways?
Not too familiar.
Okay, so kids went from 5th grade to Gateways, which was 6th and 7th combined. Then they went to algebra, then geometry, which seemed to make a lot of sense to me because they never skipped. They just went to this combined course. We got rid of that, but it might be something that might be old curriculum, but it might be a concept that would make sense.
Absolutely.
Gateways too.
And we didn't even know about gateways. And
Doorways.
Do you want the book?
So I smile because what I don't want to do is there's still a lot of synthesis to be done with the feedback as a way to kind of honor the group of folks and the multiple layer of stakeholders that are in there. But I smile because what you are saying is what's emerging quite a bit from the group.
So I just have one other question about best practices then. I can't believe we're the only district that struggles with this, right? I mean, are there best practices for how this is handled?
I'm sorry,
how you handle this issue of acceleration, skipping content. I mean,
that's quite the conundrum across the land.
it is?
Yeah.
I guess you will become the district. We will become the district in best practice.
There we go.
Are you on acceleration still?
Well, actually, do you have another comment on that?
No, I ended on acceleration. I just want to go back to, I believe the 60% is something we really need to spend time on.
And I wanted to thank Katie for making that point, and I think that you stated it very well. You know, we're spending a lot of time talking about kids who are already in that 40% number of college and career readiness. And in fact, by talking about acceleration, we're talking about an even smaller number of kids for whom acceleration might actually even be appropriate. And it is a necessarily small number. It is not meant to be for a majority of kids or a large number of kids. So in that vein, to take it back to some of the RTI, some things that we're doing. And I remember in last spring, one of the things that was brought up, in addition to the math specialists that I know we have in place, but really doing more like math intervention, like similar to what we do on the literacy side, having reading specialists who come in and work in small groups with kids who need that additional help. Obviously, this is in large part an issue of resources and where we have where we struggle financially with it. But are we thinking along those lines at this point of maybe trying to get some math specialists in place for not coaches for the teachers, but actual interventionists for the students?
So you're speaking more to a parallel kind of structure similar to what we have in literacy. Is that, if I'm hearing you correctly?
Right, and I think we kind of discussed it a little bit last spring as maybe a possibility, but is that still a possibility?
Well, I would say that right now, I mean, we need to be creative within what we currently have right now. I think part of the MTSS conversation and the next steps that I had there was to, think about what the infrastructure looked like. So that would be one of the major things. But we also recognize that we're not in a place to all of a sudden, wholesale add a ton of staff as well. So I think there's this balance of what does our current resource allocation look like? Are we maximizing our current resource allocation? But then to understand that our resources are not limited just to my department, and that we have to think about what resources we have at the school level as well to help support that within the current climate. So part of that is thinking very creatively about, well, if we know that we're not going to be gifted all of a sudden, a large pot of money to be able to have, math specialists at every school, then what is the alternative and how do we think about that? Because we have to grapple with that realization that if we're fully intending to make good on providing all of our students with this kind of support, then how are we outfitting that? So one of the major pieces is to identify multiple layers of different options and ways that we might be able to do that, and think about which makes the most sense for us, both from a fiscal standpoint, as well as one that really honors and supports the teachers in our classrooms.
I know one thing too that I think came out of the discussions at some point last spring was the idea of fluidity in the grade levels amongst teachers and using teachers who have particular strengths in math to do instruction across the grade levels.
It's not unheard of. I mean, I've worked in some districts where they have, for example, 4th or 5th grade departmentalization, and there are some teachers that are extremely solid in mathematics. Right. They just feel good about it in and out, and the team has developed a concept such that they end up departmentalizing within that grade. So certainly something that has been done in other districts, and I don't see why it wouldn't be something that we would at least think about, consider, and what that then means about the work that we're doing. But again, one of those things where we'd have to weigh out and balance all the different other pieces that would be impacted by such a move. But you're absolutely right. There are different ways that we could consider how we resource our staff currently at the school to help support all of our learners.
And then just one last
Sure.
thought, question about, because I don't know anything about this Gateways program because that was before my time.
That makes two of us.
Yeah, but I guess, I don't know, I guess I would caution us. It sounds to me like going back to some sort of tracking.
That's exactly
which-
why they got rid of it.
And and I think there's research to suggest that there's a reason to move away from that. And so before we go back into that, I think we need to really consider there was a reason that we moved away from it, and
But I would-
it might not be the direction we.
If I may make a comment, in any scenario in which you create a model for acceleration, doesn't that by virtue track?
That's what I was just going to say. We
I mean, regardless of what model you have, whether it's compacting learning or whether it's course skipping, you're still essentially separating groups of students. So I would just want to offer that as...
I really agree with that because I think we did that. In fact, we were replacing one form of tracking with another, and it made everyone feel good. But whether or not it was educationally sound is the question.
Absolutely.
You know, I just want to point out too, I think everyone here is committed to focusing on the 60% who need to improve their academic achievement in math. The reason that Jess and team focused on acceleration is because we asked them to. We've talked about it, 2 years ago in the spring, we talked about it last year in the spring, and it was brought to the board, and we said, this is broken, this needs some attention, go fix it. And so I get that we need to spread our focus. But we did, we gave that message.
I think some gave that message. I think that some heard.
I'm not saying, I just think, there may be that, I think there's also been I think it's more than that.
And whether it was
I think
5 or 7 or whatever, I'm not sure, but I think they were responding to what they heard from the board.
I will agree with this. I think that there's some things that had to be worked through. I totally agree with that. But do we think that it should be 50% of the math department's time? And I think, do you know what I mean? I think we're all, and I think that's what I'm saying is after this gets worked through, the time needs to be spent.
We had that discussion about acceleration, which I remember pretty clearly before we had the accountability and achievement report and saw what a position we were in. So I think that that's another thing to keep in mind is that we wanted, there's been a lot of pressure from the community. There's been a lot of discussion about acceleration. There's been a lot of push to change it. So that's not so bad. But I didn't get from you that you were leaving out the 60%.
Oh, absolutely not. I explicitly focused on MTSS first as a way to say that we need to support all students, and that the 60% to which you're referring is really, a major focus. And with the idea that everything that was subsequent to the MTSS conversation fits under a much larger vision for what we mean by high quality mathematics for all kids.
I also think that what our desire is that we can get the acceleration piece in place so you don't have to spend your time with parents deciding where the placement is, because I think it's historically eaten up a lot of time of the administration because the process itself was flawed and it created a lot of noise that you had to deal with. So if you can fix that, you will free up your time, I think, for a lot more.
Well, my hope is that the work that we're doing, and being thoughtful about the process in which we're going about it, starts to really build the kind of fixes, so to speak, that would allow for us to expend some more energy and time and resources on the 60%.
And our real goal here is to be transparent and to be able to set the process down in a way that people will understand both internals of the system, so our principals and instructional leaders and our teachers who are teaching math at whatever grade level or in the middle school, as well as externally, so that it's understandable, people can see where we're at and where we're going, so that then again Jess and team can focus on other things.
I'm sorry, I have
No, that's
the last
okay.
one. I have two questions, and then I have to refer back to Jennifer's questions because I think we skipped one of those. The first one is going back to the differentiation. I think you addressed it with Candace, but I'm not sure I understood the answer. because I understand in literacy with the guided reading and the level text that it's built into the curriculum, the differentiation. I'm not sure in everyday math whether the curriculum itself supports that flexible grouping or the different level.
It absolutely does.
It does, okay.
It absolutely, unequivocally does. And I think part of the, one of the reasons why we want to develop this framework is to be able to articulate, yes, it does. And there are a number of pieces and components to the system, both from, instructional materials as well as for, with respect to guidance around strategies that can be employed within, any given lesson. And so to be able to parse that out and to be able to articulate that, and then to be able to share that both with our teachers as well as our community, allows for us to have a lever, but first of all, to kind of say, well, parents, if you're not sure about, differentiation, is to be able to point out, so what options are we providing for our kids, and to be able, it's right there. I mean, the idea that Paul was talking about transparency is unbelievably important in this, right? So I mean, I think there's the aspect of knowing what's there, there's the aspect of then putting that into practice, and then there's the aspect of making sure that we're articulating that across all different constituents and stakeholders. So absolutely.
And then my last question, or statement actually, and I think this push-pull and acceleration has been around as long as I've been in the district and on the board, and the question to what end is often asked, and it's been answered in the past by counting the number of students in MV Calculus. And I challenge you to expand that and really look at the high school and look at the opportunities presented to those students who are accelerated, and it goes beyond MV Calc to Stats AP, to Econ, and then I want you also to think about the Chem Phys program, which is really one of the, it's a great program at the high school, and those teachers in the junior and senior year, how the kids do who are accelerated versus those who aren't. And so there are opportunities beyond just maxing out at MV Calculus that's opened up to students who are accelerated. So that's,
absolutely.
Okay, thanks. And then Jennifer had a question about the pilot and about technology, so I thought we should probably speak to those as well.
So with regard to the pilot, I mean, those considerations are absolutely being made within the context of the acceleration updates, and really more from, there's quantitative data that supports the work that is happening around essentially for those of you that aren't aware of the algebra pilot, it's where algebra 1 is being taught to a heterogeneous group of students versus a tracked class. And so we're talking about the range of learners within a given classroom. And there's pretty strong data that from both of our teachers that have been doing this pilot now, I want to say for 2 or 3 years, that supports that. But from a qualitative sense, there's also ideas around when we think about differentiation and we think about the ideas that we just talked about around that, is thinking about what are the current supports that we do have in place. I mean, so if we think about the algebra pilot, it's not just about looking at the data, but looking at the wraparound of everything. I would say that we need to also take a look at what other aspects are pros or checks in the column of this could actually work for a majority of students. And one of those things is that we have a double period block of mathematics at 6th through 8th grade that I have never heard of in any other district, and it's a wonderful thing. So we have this at our advantage, but how are we actually using that time to support all learners? We have great advantage in the fact that our mathematics curriculum, I have full confidence and faith in the Connected Mathematics program, the 3rd edition of it, but thinking about that as, when you think about this case of idea of compaction versus, meaning putting more than one course within one grade level, is the fact that 8th grade mathematics within Connected Mathematics Program 3 is 6 out of 8 units. And that to be able to do an Algebra 1 course, you just do all 8 out of 8 units, because the standards in 8th grade mathematics and in Algebra 1 are so closely intertwined that you could actually, do an Algebra 1 course with 2 additional units versus doing the 6. So I mean, there's ideas around thinking about the algebra pilot that aren't just relegated to thinking about the data of student achievement, but also thinking about the other aspects that might fit into the feasibility of it actually working. So as part of the acceleration updates and the more detailed breakdown of how we land and, with respect to the course sequence and things of that nature, that's actually one of the aspects that we explore.
Thank you. And then the technology piece for the early grades is
So I think what's tricky about the technology piece is that we are thinking about ideas for which we might do some personalized learning, but I think we have to think about those within the context of the bigger picture of how we're supporting learners to advance and to be able to meet their levels of understanding in mathematics. We've actually engaged some folks in around STMath. If you're familiar with it, it's the Mind Institute. And we're actually doing a very, very, very small pilot at Shoot School, where we're getting a sense of how that supports a small set of students, but we're also going out to some schools to get a sense of what that looks like and how that might play out in the bigger picture. I think the big thing to understand about personalized learning and about any computer-based program is that we owe it to our kids that all students must access core instruction. And if core instruction is defined by the work that we're doing in everyday mathematics and in CMP3 as the core of our materials, what flexibility, what other areas or avenues do we have to provide avenues for personalized learning opportunities? It's important to also note that there are personalized learning options that are being built into the 4th edition of Everyday Mathematics, as there is in CMP3. And again, it goes back to a question of to what extent do we consistently across the board, from teacher to teacher, classroom to classroom, principal to principal, really understand the power of what we have at our fingertips and how to utilize them through the maximum ability. John, I don't know if you wanted to speak a little bit to any of the STMath pieces or personalized learning.
I think that's what we're working on right now. That's what we're doing, is this small pilot at Shoot, and we'll take it from there.
And just,
beginning.
I'm sorry, so that everyone is aware, one of the things that came up in the Finance Committee meeting, I think, is generally that the board wants to, before we make additional investments in technology, we really want to, understand how it connects to the curriculum and what we're going, that we've got a plan, that we're not just sort of doing one-off things. And so as I only share that because, you weren't there and I think a couple other people weren't here. Whatever that may mean for your planning and such, to just know that the board is paying close attention to that.
Cool. Thank you.
Two quick comments as we end here. One, a lot of what Jess is discussing and what was brought up today depends on professional learning and depends on how we engage our staff across the grade levels with the materials that we have, with supplementary materials as well. And so that's a big part of the agenda. The second thing is just to thank Jess. He came in running from day one and has engaged with community members, with board now, with building a staff out in the schools. These are important questions that have come forward over the years, and Jess has jumped in and earned a stripe or two as you've gone along. So I just want to thank you for your work.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Okay, we're now on to the strategic plan update with Paul Anderson.
Well, I don't have a particular update
I don't
today.
have a real,
Okay.
I have a timeline with things that are happening, but you can start.
Just a quick one. It's really being repetitive from earlier. Peter Godard, for instance, is not here tonight because he's with the strategic plan as we speak. Hopefully he's not watching. And looking at the range of comments and concerns and critique and suggestions and pats on the back that we've received, and working hand in glove with me and then with the chapter writers to be able to move the draft forward to a final copy. As I said earlier, one of the big ahas is, and it's one that's also dependent on resources, we have to think about what we can do and what we can do successfully and not overpromise. And I think that's going to be a big part of what our presentation will be when we bring it back to the board for full considerations on March 3rd. And then when we bring it back for approval on March 23rd. March 2nd.
March 2nd.
When we bring it back on March 2nd, excuse me, and then March 23rd.
When will we get a copy of it before the March 3rd meeting?
As
March 2nd.
We will get it to you. I don't want to promise the date because I don't have my calendar in front of me. Several days in advance. March 2nd is a Monday. I'm hoping to get it to you by that Friday. Is what I believe.
And so, just to confirm, the public comment period ended on the 11th. So that's why we're now in this phase of integrating, collecting, synthesizing those comments, and doing whatever revisions. And then in conjunction with that, or parallel with that, we will also be having discussions around the board's outcome goals, both on the 2nd and then the 23rd. And Peter had sent out a message or an email to the board providing what the draft goals were and some other thoughts that have come up, so, and asked, for thoughts and feedback to him. Okay, by Thursday this week, so that then he can kind of bring that together, and so we won't be working from kind of blue sky. We'll have a skeletal of what feedback he had gotten from the board, which will help us, I think, be more efficient in our discussion.
And then we will, I do not believe we'll have this by March 2nd, but we will also be working on a shorter version, the 4-pager or 6-pager rather than the longer version. That would be we would be able to use to communicate in broad audiences. And we're thinking about some sort of document that places all of us who work inside the district inside the plan. What does it mean to you as a teacher? What does it mean to you as a principal? What does it mean to you as a parent? Actually, that's the shorter version that we're doing. And again, that may come, quite frankly, after the 23rd, after we put to press the larger version in the executive summary. That said, too, we are already starting conversations about rolling out the plan and making it part of the fabric of our day-to-day lives. And we had a conversation with our colleagues at DEC, the Teachers Association, today about partnering with them and with our colleagues across the schools on making the document and everything that we're committing to in a live document that carries on, so that by March 24th, it's not over, it's just beginning. And it's really part of the work that we're doing as we move forward.
Questions? Okay, principal evaluation.
Thank you. I do not have handouts, so I'm going to go from the presentation and happy to answer questions. Although I have the privilege of presenting and sharing a little bit about principal evaluation tonight, do just want to take a moment to thank members of Cabinet, Joyce, Beatrice, Paul, especially, who have helped to develop and implement the system of principal evaluation, and also to the principals themselves. This is a question that I asked as I did my listening and learning tour around the district when I first joined. Tell me about your experiences with principal observation, and what did you enjoy about that, and how could we improve? And my colleagues had a lot of input into this process. So as a brief overview, our objectives are to build the strongest core of principals in Illinois, bar none, to recruit, attract, retain, and train the very best principals, because we believe that principals are a key lever for school improvement. Our objective is to provide high expectations, but also transparent feedback that serve as a model throughout the organization. Principal evaluator to principal, principal to teacher, teacher to student. These same principles should apply. And also to model and set up a model of continuous improvement and growth for all of the professionals in the district. Our system is fully compliant with the expectations set forth by state law, and we've met all of the deadlines to do this. So principals received an outline of principal evaluation procedures and expectations by the first day of school. I held goal-setting conversations with all the principals that I'm evaluating, and Joyce with hers, prior to October 1st. We've conducted 2 formal observations for each principal, which means a scheduled appointment, a statement of objective, and then written feedback, as well as a post-conference. And then, in order to make sure that we were being comprehensive across all of the standards, there are 6. Principals also had 2 opportunities to deliver and share written feedback with me outside of the 2 observations. The self-evaluations that each principal completed were due by February 1st. Every one of our principals complied with that deadline. We use the state rubric to evaluate principal practice, and then summative ratings will be delivered to principals by March 1st, which is coming up very soon. There have been some changes from past practice that we've put into place this year to reach our objectives. First of all, the feedback is more extensive and intensive. It's tied explicitly to standards and indicators. And so within a formal feedback loop, principals are receiving multiple layers of feedback tied to specific aspects of their practice. So even when principals walk away with an observation that says that you are proficient, you're getting an idea of where my relative strengths and weaknesses are within that observation. All of those observations are followed up with a face-to-face conversation that focuses on strengths and weaknesses. As I'll talk a little bit more about the observations in a moment, and the written documentation. But then also importantly, the professional development, we meet with principals monthly, has been explicitly tied to aspects of the principal competencies and standards that we've been focused on. So one formal observation cycle is involves a little bit of prep work. I didn't put that on here, but that's there. The observation, the face-to-face, hip-to-hip time with the principal in the school is 3 to 3.5 hours of direct observation of principal practice. That includes visiting classrooms, observing team meetings, professional development, planning sessions with ILT, and conversations with the principal. Then there's the preparation of the written feedback, which is about 1 hour to 2 hours of work, and then a scheduled hour of discussion with each principal afterwards. Some of those are a little bit shorter, some of those are a little bit longer, but that's what they're scheduled for. So you can see that each cycle itself is comprehensive and intensive and is really intended to gather as much information as possible and then provide the principals with feedback that they can use. I won't go to the standards. You can find them online. There are 6 standards, 20-something indicators, and then 49 elements within those standards, and we use these standards that were developed at the state level for our principals. So really quickly, there's an example of an objective. So for a formal observation, an invitation is sent out for a time frame with an objective. So for example, Standard 6, which is around school and student culture, the principal will discuss vision for student culture, and the principal and observer will complete a walkthrough of the school. So what's the standard and what's the activity? That objective needs to be shared. I take notes, handwritten, and also typed notes that I use then for the write-up. Then, as I mentioned, principals get between 8 to 10, some are a little bit more, some are a little bit less, individual pieces of evidence that are linked to standards and linked to performance descriptors. And then we have that post-conference. And then Dr. Gorin has been following up with both Joyce and myself to review our feedback, give us feedback on our feedback, and that kind of continuous cycle of improvement as well. I said there were 2 opportunities for written evidence. These were tied to standards that were not directly observed. So my observations focused on standards 3, 4, and 6. So standards 1, 2, and 5 where principals gathered written evidence and answering a couple of questions that I posed to them, and they submitted that evidence to me, and we got to read all of that. And so they got feedback on that written evidence as well. Oh, did I skip one? Right. So 31 of those observations have been conducted. 1 is scheduled. The feedback has been delivered for all of those observations. The written feedback for the documentation has been provided, and Dr. Gorin and I have summative evaluation conferences that are set for next week. We do it together. And we're looking ahead to next year. We want to maintain the rigor, the high expectations that we have for our school leaders. We want to continue to provide the targeted support that's linked to what we're finding in the observation cycle this year. How do we use what we are learning? How do the principals use what they're learning to set goals and provide focus for next year? We want to maintain the level of formal but increase the number of informal observations. That's just us popping into schools, being present in classrooms, being present in teacher team meetings, what's going on, getting a sense of the school, and providing principals with written feedback about that. We want to decrease the paperwork demands on principals in an effort to be really comprehensive and get to know schools really well. We've demanded a lot of our principals this year around paperwork, and we want to decrease that demand while keeping the rigor. And start to plan new and collaborative and differentiated professional development for principals that are tied to their individual learning goals and the learning goals of their schools. That's it. Happy to take any questions.
I just have a comment. I think this is something really important to celebrate. You know, we've had a really clear teacher appraisal system for quite a while, and I think what you've done and all of your colleagues in this process is really lay out clear expectations and, you know, rigorous standards. I think the quote that I heard you use, and I'm probably going to get it wrong, was something like, you can't have outstanding schools without outstanding school leaders. And I think what we're putting in place here is really the foundation to help ensure that we have outstanding school leaders. And I personally am really grateful for everyone who did all the work to get us to this point. It is a huge step in the right direction as we look at trying to improve all student success. So thank you for all the work, and I'm really excited about this.
Here. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Our upcoming work, it's our next meeting we talked about, is the presentation of the strategic plan on March 2nd. And then we have some committee reports. Any other upcoming work?
Is it the second or third?
No.
It's Monday, the 2nd.
What is it?
Second.
I do have one thing. I'm just wondering, we talked at finance about having an update on the work at Lincoln and getting an FYI on that. I thought that might have found its way into tonight's packet, but I'm not sure what the timed planning is at this point.
May I?
It was not there, Katie.
If I may, and I'm going to read from a text that I just received from Mary Brown.
Okay.
Predicting that question.
Great.
After the Finance Committee meeting, I reached out to the MWRD, the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District, and I want to publicly thank Deborah Shore, who responded almost immediately to my email. And she's one of the elected officials that is one of the governors or trustees of the MWRD. The executive director and his team wrote back immediately and said that their greatest goal is to respond within 30 days to a finalized plan. So what we're working on, so that was the response from MWRD. The report back, and I'll just paraphrase this from Dr. Mary Brown on our staff. The civil engineer is working on a revised timeline for the project. He said if there's no delays at the city or at MWRD, the engineer believes the field could be substantially complete in September with use anticipated for late October. Again, there's a big clause in there, if there are no delays, but we're proceeding rapidly and doing the best we can. So we need the plans. Once we get the plans, we can provide them to the governmental entities to get the permits, and once we get the permits, we can move forward.
So maybe as an FYI at the next board meeting in that packet, could we just provide to the community what that timeline looks like?
Yep.
Because I know we talked quite a while at the Finance Committee about that.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Great. And in terms of upcoming work in March, we have 4 meetings, so just for everyone to prepare themselves. The 2nd, we have the strategic plan. The 9th, the finance. 16th is our joint 202-65 meeting, and then the 23rd is our regular board meeting. So, and then we have a joint committee meeting on the 26th at 7:30 a.m. here, and that will be in preparation. Am I wrong? At the high school. Oh,
February 26th?
Okay. 7:30 a.m. and it'll be in preparation for the joint meeting. So we'll go over sort of the basic areas we've been covering all year: the cradle to career, the literacy goal, the architecture for the joint achievement report, which comes out next year, and then probably updates on the calendar committee, I would guess.
Correct.
Right.
Sounds good.
Great. Finance, Richard.
Sure. Next meeting is March 9th. We had robust discussion on many topics a week ago. Financial situation is not very promising, as we saw earlier tonight, and we'll continue to keep our eye on it and work collaboratively with the administration to see how we can manage that going forward.
Park School, Richard?
So anyone else can chime in on this too. We have an advisory committee meeting. It's a little bit different than normal because there will be a presentation of the Park Long-Term Planning Committee that will be shared at the advisory committee meeting. So that will actually be a public meeting, and just as a reminder to Adela to make sure that we meet the requirements for that. And that's really to allow any board members to attend that meeting so you can hear the presentation. And that is, I believe, at 7:30 in the morning, following our board meeting, our finance committee meeting on March 9th. So, slumber party.
And the topic of the meeting is?
Well, so there are biannual Park School Advisory Committee meetings, but the topic of particular interest is the recommendation that will come out of the Park Long-Term Planning Committee.
We don't know what that is.
We don't know what that is yet. There is a meeting on Thursday night.
Are you on that?
There's not officially board members assigned to it, but they've been welcome to attend, and I have attended about half the meetings over a 16-month period.
Policy Committee.
No, no particular update. I don't think we meet again until May.
The Wellness Council, that was today?
Yes, the Wellness Council met this afternoon. You know, lots of really very interesting things going on across the district in terms of initiatives that schools are bringing to focus on wellness. But one thing in particular that I encourage anybody who might still be watching and on their school wellness committee, it is the time of year again to complete the CDC School Health Index, the survey. So please contact Jordan Ryan for information on, or Melanie Mudarth on how to complete that survey, which is very important for planning purposes and evaluation purposes.
Thank you. Katie?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
On our joint meeting,
yes,
on the 16th, is there going to be a discussion of Park School? Because isn't that, I mean,
well, that's a good question. We had talked about that, but then I think
because I feel like I don't really know what's going on with Park School except what I'm hearing kind of scuttlebutt, which is never a good way to form information. But if there's this meeting on March 10th where it's going to be presented and there's going to be potentially changes to Park School that could impact Park School, it seems to me that we should have a conversation of that at a board meeting that's televised.
I would agree with that.
So I think we should do it on the March 16th joint board meeting.
And you know, I think what occurred, Katie, is the advisory committee meeting was going to be much earlier. It was going to occur in January, like I think middle to end of the month. So it was postponed by 6 or 7 weeks, which now is creating this sort of back-to-back.
Well, so, I mean, could we, and just because we're meeting next week, am I missing something? But why wouldn't we just put it on the agenda then for after March 10th to talk about it publicly at March 16th? Because it's natural between our two schools that work together. Is there any reason why we wouldn't do that?
I think we should put it on the joint 65-202 committee meeting to discuss whether or not we should put it on.
I actually like that suggestion a lot, though. I think that would be the appropriate way to handle it, given how the timing has shifted.
I think it's a great idea.
Okay, so we'll talk about it on the 26th.
Absolutely.
Okay, thanks.
Good suggestion.
Evanston Community School Initiative.
Candace is going to give.
I'm going to give the update for the Evanston Community School Initiative. So there's a document in your packets, and I want to thank Missy Carpenter for actually putting this together for us so that we can share it. Just by way of background, there's a leadership council for the Evanston Community Schools Initiative, which Katie has been serving on as a board member, and more recently I've started to attend as we're transitioning kind of that role. And that Leadership Council has been charged over the last year with looking at beyond the shoot pilot, learnings from that, and then what might a more comprehensive scale up of community school or community school services look like. So there was a study commissioned over the late summer and early fall that basically stepped through what are best practices around this, interviews with other community school districts across the country, also talking to folks at Shoot, and then interviews with many of the board members as well as many stakeholders in the community about community schools and what their desires as well as concerns are, and then looking at basically best practices of how these programs tend to scale up. So over the past few months, and you'll see in your document an action plan, the Leadership Council took that work, which was built out very kindly by Casey Varela, who did the study, and basically mapped out, okay, a rather ambitious action plan of based on those best practices. What are the steps that we would need to go through to look at more broadly scaling community schools here? So the Leadership Council wanted to bring this board up to date quickly on kind of just what that activity has been. So you see there all the actions that have happened as well as what the council is working on now. And right now we're right around, in terms of the February-March activities, we have a number of meetings coming up, and the tasks that we'll be focused on are, one, next week is talking about the leadership structure. So the Leadership Council now consists primarily of District 65, which is well represented because the council recognizes that community schools aren't going to work without it being baked into and part of the vision of District 65 operating in our schools. So we've got Katie and myself, as well as Barb Hiller, Assistant Superintendent Joyce Bartz, and Teresa Quinn has been added. She's a social worker at Shoot to provide that local perspective on how things are going at Shoot. So we've got the most participants on the Leadership Council. And then YOU is represented, the McGaw Y, Foundation 65, United Way, the North, Northwest, Northeast, Northwest, and Family Focus is actually joining the council as well. So this group will be meeting next week to talk about how that translates into leadership structure of roles, responsibilities, decision-making authority going forward. And then the next two meetings are going to be focused on very meaty topics of, okay, what would a scale-up look like in terms of criteria, what schools, and that will obviously be heavily influenced by the perspective of the administration and others. And then what we're going to be doing some resource mapping. So what does a resource map look like, and what would need to happen in order to scale at the level that this plan would call for that's being developed. So I just wanted to make sure everyone was aware of the work, because it's accelerating, I think, at a pace that's really wonderful and ambitious, but it will be important for you guys all to be in touch with that. A couple members of the team met with Dr. Gorin last week, met with Seth Green and Missy Carpenter and Rachel Heyman, who's from the board at YOU. And one of the pieces of work that we're working on right now is goals and guiding principles, which obviously is a setup to these next pieces of work. And so we share the draft of those. It's still in development. But there's kind of a very quick sequencing of many of these pretty substantive pieces of development. So we wanted to make sure we're in closer touch with the board here, and also let you know that in a couple months, post these several activities that I just talked about, we're hoping to the team would be making, members of the Leadership Council, making a presentation back to the District 65 board as well as to the other representative boards, and talking about, okay, well, now what is the plan that we believe is the right plan, getting your questions and input, and then also talking about the resourcing piece. So that's the quick update. I think the question to this team is, as we're thinking through and building out that presentation and the discussion, what's important to you as far as evidence, information, etc. If we're trying to get to the point that our respective groups will be making decisions upon, kind of moving forward in some phased planning of scaling community schools and then resourcing it. So if you have those thoughts now, love to hear them. If you want to think on it and send them on, please do. It's meant to be, this is a very collaborative process, and it's a collaborative decision-making process, so we want to make sure that we know as best as we can, you know, what we should plan for. Okay, be part of that
Any
discussion.
thoughts?
My only suggestion would be that you should look at a school that feeds into shoes, so Walker, Dawes, or Oakton.
From a criteria. Yeah.
It just makes sense, so that way the family can sort of just go from K through 8 through the whole program.
And I'm sure that will be among the discussion points as criteria, so thanks.
The only thing else, Tracy, is I think we should probably, you know, March is chock full. but
Yeah.
Get this on a calendar, don't you think? When is it, April?
For April, yeah. So
I
maybe
would
the
also
17th
think
or
that
whatever that
when
is.
we're making decisions about finances, we have obviously a lot of
Yes.
pressure on us from
Yep.
many sides. We would want to look at very concrete goals for what defines success in the year and how those goals were met. So we would have a good story to, you know, re-up our commitment and to talk about balancing against other needs in the district. So I think that, you know, real data is helpful.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple points that, I mean, the goals that we are setting right now are very broad-based. You know, what are the goals of community schools? The design and structure itself is meant such that you would have, and I think, United Way will be helping with this because they have very clear outcome goals. They support community schools in various communities. Which of those outcome goals are adopted at particular schools could differ. So I think it will have to be very specific to the schools that are being launched. So it may be that we have hierarching goals, but then, you know, kind of specific goals that are specific to a school here versus a school there, because they might take a different model. But to your point, you know, if there are specific things that the board wants to see, and because we haven't discussed those goals and what they should be, would love to, you know, hear that.
The only thing I want to say really quick about that, because it's just really, the way the community schools are set up is so, I mean, that they're locally run, that's how they make it a success, that the specific metrics really become related to the school, gives the school ownership. So I think that's one of the points. I think though, one of the things we still have to figure out how it fits into is just the review of what currently is happening at SHU and what those metrics are.
Yeah.
And so I think if that could be used as an example of what the status is at SHU, how is that going? They've got, and some of it is survey, you know, data, but how are they feeling at SHU that it's successful? I'm having maybe Teresa come in.
And I'm not even saying that we impose those metrics, but maybe they've set them themselves and they've measured it, I would think.
So for sure, including that in the discussion.
Okay, now we're on to joint legislative 202-65, Claudia?
Yeah, I was looking at this, for some reason noticed for the first time, it's really an inappropriately named committee because it's got a high involvement with Northwestern and the city of Evanston as well. And what this committee really does is plans the lobbying day that we do down in Springfield every year. I mean, that's the essence of what that committee is about. So they're moving the lobby day, we're moving the lobby day to later in the spring. So it's, and actually talking about actually going around and meeting, like have groups of people who have a designated issue and going around meeting with the respective legislators that would have influence on whatever we would like to see happen. So to make it truly more of a lobbying day rather than, it was more of a, I would say, an informational day last year, I thought.
Do you have a date yet for that?
There were some tentative dates being floated around. It was in April, but I don't think there was a specific date mentioned. A specific date in April.
All right, thanks. Head Start.
Oh, you left out the city school liaison.
Yeah,
sorry. Claudia?
They seem so similar. And
I know, maybe
in fact,
I did. I looked at it.
They are very similar. On the agenda for tomorrow, homelessness, cradle to career, joint literacy goal, safety, summer youth opportunities. And we just basically are sharing the Gibbs Morrison Cultural Center and then individualized career and academic plans. So all of these will be discussed tomorrow. Candace will be there.
Full agenda.
I will be there.
Okay,
For
thank
50
you,
minutes.
Kim.
Head Start is, there's a memo in the packet, and it just refers to basically the parent-teachers conferences happening this month, and then some other announcements really for the Head Start parents regarding medical and dental examinations, so.
Great, thanks. There's obviously a lot of work that's going on beyond these board meetings. Larry, unless you have a presentation. Okay, if there's no further business to be brought before the board, I find this meeting adjourned.